Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cross Bible. We are now live. We had some audio and video issues that we just worked out. So I am joined today by Professor Gil'ad Zuckermann. He is a linguist and language revivalist, listed among Australia's top 30 living legends of research. And he's joining us today from Sydney, Australia. So he is a day ahead of us on Sunday. For everybody else, happy Valentine's Day. Uh, Professor Zuckermann holds a doctorate from Oxford. He taught at Cambridge and is currently professor of linguistics at Flinders University in Australia. Is that still current?
Yes, and I'm in Adelaide, Australia, rather than Sydney. So we have
Okay.
half an hour difference. So yes, so it's currently 10:38 in the morning.
All right. Well, Dr. Zuckermann is the author of this amazing book right here called Revivalistics. So there's a link in the chat to anybody who is intrigued by the discussion to dig deeper. It's a very nerdy book. It's quite dense. I read it back in 2024 originally, and I've been rereading it to get ready for this show. So I was just trying to refresh my memory on a lot of it. So the full title is Revivalistics from the Genesis of Israeli to Language Reclamation in Australia and beyond. This is published by Oxford University Press. And Professor Zuckermann was born in Israel. And so the language that we're going to be focusing on today, which a lot of people know as modern Hebrew, is Dr. Zuckermann's native language, and he provocatively calls this language Israeli. And so we're going to get into that. It's a very, very fascinating topic. Dr. Zuckermann's work focuses on contact linguistics, lexicology, language revival, and what happens when a language returns from centuries of dormancy. So welcome to the Cross Bible live stream. And if I got any of that wrong, please correct the record. I'd like you to sort of introduce yourself and let us know what you're working on.
I'm very happy to be here with you, Stephen. I hope you hear me well.
I do.
I have been following you for a while, and I'm very happy when you mention Hebrew, you mention Israeli, and it's a fascinating topic, not only because I was born in Israel and I'm a native speaker of a revival language. Not too many people I know are native speakers of revival languages, but also because, Christians all over the world use inadvertently Hebrew words, sometimes via Greek and Latin. So, for example, when you say Lord, you don't even realize that you say Adonai, because Adonai became Kyrios. It's a calque, and Kyrios became Dominus. It's a calque, and Dominus became Lord. Why don't you say teacher, for example? This is because of Adonai. Or when you say, for example, to pay, I'm going to pay you a tip. Without knowing that, you actually speak Hebrew, because in Hebrew, you have a distinction between shalom, which means peace, and leshalem, which means to pacify or to pay. And therefore, Latin kind of calqued it. So pax pacare, pax peace, pacare, pacify or pay, and then pacare pagare in Italian. And then, of course, you have pay, which comes from Latin. So, in other words, when you say pay, you speak Hebrew without knowing it. So Hebrew is a fascinating and multifaceted language. So, yeah, this is why I'm happy to be here today with you, Stephen.
Well, I kind of wanted to share something that you sent to me a long time ago, which is sort of like a bit of a claim to fame, because Stephen Fry interviewed you on a few different occasions. And in one of these, it's part of this documentary, I guess it's a series or a documentary film that he made called Fry's Planet Word. And it's all about language. It's super nerdy. And I'm going to see if I can maybe we may run into some ads, but if I play it picture to picture, I want to see if I can bring it on and just give people a little teaser of what you were involved in here. Okay, let me see if this will play and I can add it. Okay, so most people I think can see this. Let me know if you have any audio issues.
Before a man called Jesus Christ walked.
Wait a minute. Okay.
I partnered with Dove Men Plus Care to bring you their new line of deodorants.
I knew we were going to run into some ads. So in this interview, give me some of the background. So he came out to Israel. You were living in Israel at the time.
No.
On Fiverr,
So,
you can find the perfect freelancer for your AI.
Sorry, go ahead.
yes. So Stephen contacted me maybe 15 years ago, even a little bit, 16 years ago.
Stephen Fry, yeah.
Project.
Stephen Fry, a lovely guy. And I was in Australia at the time, already a professor. I think I was at the University of Queensland, and just before I got my professorship at the University of Adelaide. And he told me that he read an article that I wrote, and he was very interested to interview me in Israel. So I went to Israel anyway, and he sent his lovely director, and we were looking for a nice hotel for Stephen. And then I think that the director was there also to check whether I was a good interviewee. And then Stephen came in 2011, and we spent 7 hours together and became very close friends. And out of these 7 hours, I think 11 minutes were aired, 7.5 in the clip that you might be able to show. And I took him to Rishon LeZion. Yeah, that's exactly the clip there. So we can listen
the
to
state of
it.
Israel in the aftermath of the Second World War and the Holocaust. The most crucial question facing them was, what language do we speak? Yiddish, the lingua franca of the Middle European Jew, was polluted, tainted by the shtetl, by pogroms, and by the death camps. Russian was too limited, so they made the bold decision to reinvent Hebrew as a modern, living language.
Israeli linguist Gil'ad Zuckermann is taking me to Rishon LeZion, where the first Hebrew school was built in 1889. Stopping off in a garage for some mechanical problem-solving exposes an intriguing linguistic problem.
Yeah, this
How
is a great
do you
set.
describe things that simply didn't exist in the Bible?
אני קניתי מכונית ואני רוצה לעשות בדיקה כללית של הכל, של כל המכונית, וזה סטיבן.
Shalom.
נעים מאוד.
Hi.
אני אורן.
אורן? נעים מאוד, גלעד.
נעים מאוד, אורן.
אז אנחנו רוצים לבדוק את המכונית הזאת, כי פשוט עכשיו אני רוצה לקנות אותה, אז גלגלים, אמברקס,
Handbrakes, did you say?
Yeah.
Handbrakes.
יש קרבורטור בה?
לא, אין כאן קרבורטור, היום זה כבר אינג'קטורים.
I got that. You said
Yeah.
the carburetor, and you said no,
Carburetor.
it's fuel injected.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of English words in there.
Well, they did create Hebrew words for carburetors, etc., but not all of them caught on.
There are a lot of English words. Are there any biblical Hebrew words in there that you can see?
יש פה שמות עבריים,
Yes.
למשל מה עברית?
Battery is מצבר.
מצבר. It's a Hebrew-based word.
Right.
But obviously it's a new word because it's a new concept.
Quite, so it wouldn't
But-
exist in the Bible.
Right. Litzbor means to collect and to store. So matzber,
Yeah.
you know, it collects, I guess, energy.
Well, that's
Matzber.
also known as a capacitor.
Capacitor.
Isn't it? So it's
Exactly.
capacitor, exactly the same
Exactly.
idea. And,
Yeah.
and I mean, this bottle here, I mean, obviously there would be Hebrew words in the Bible for bottles and jars.
So I think that's a good demonstration. The link to that full video is in the description for anybody who wants to watch it. And there's lots of ads, so that's why I don't want to get too distracted with it. But it is a fascinating setup to go into an extremely modern, environment, which is the garage, and then have this guy speaking essentially this form, explain the dynamic between his use of obviously like English words inserted into Israeli dialogue. Like what was going on under the hood there for people who didn't understand that dialogue?
So this was completely spontaneous, by the way. So I just took Stephen, I drove this Fiat Punto, I think, and took him to Rishon LeZion. Rishon LeZion is the place where Israeli, my term for revived Hebrew, was taught to children. There is a lovely kindergarten there, and I took him to that place, and he met some children who were similar to the ones who had been there 120 years earlier, or 110 years earlier. So when I went to this, to Oren is an auto mechanic, and I said, look, I mean, can you check the carburetor? Can you check the... So I just spoke Israeli normally, and Stephen could understand what I was saying, although he does not know, obviously, Hebrew or Israeli. He knows some Yiddish, being Jewish, but he doesn't know Hebrew or Israeli. So I think it's because Israeli is full of Englishisms, especially when it comes to auto mechanics and to sport, because don't forget that when the Jews came back to their old country, so my DNA shows that I'm 80% from Canaan, which is Israel 3,000 years ago. My DNA is in Israel 3,000 years ago. When they came back to Israel, it was, among other things, during the Turkish Ottoman Empire and then the British Mandate, and the British influenced a lot the language that emerged at the time. But on the other hand, when you curse in Israeli, when you use a swear word, you use an Arabism. So if an Arabic speaker listens to an Israeli, he would understand a lot because all the swear words are Arabic. Just like if you speak Ukrainian, all the swear words are Russian. So it's very easy for a Russian to understand a Ukrainian swearing. It's very easy for an Arab to understand an Israeli swearing because it comes from their languages. So Israeli, I told it to Stephen then, it was kind of my metaphors. Israeli, on the one hand, is a phoenix rising from the ashes, that's Hebrew. But on the other hand, I told him, Israeli is a cuckoo laying its eggs in the nest of another bird, triggering it to believe that it is its own offspring. This is the Yiddish. And on the other hand, it's a magpie stealing from American, from English, from Arabic, etc. So it's a finny cuckoo cross with some magpie characteristics. Now, Stephen liked the metaphor so much that he used this metaphor when he went to Africa as well. You can watch this Fry's Planet Word. I have to say that Stephen is a lovely guy who is very acute linguistically, like you, Stephen. And he told me something very funny. I will share it with you. I don't think he has shared it with publicly, but he told me that when his grandfather, who was Jewish from Hungary, went to England, he was escaping in the 30s, I think, before the Holocaust. And they told him, don't speak Yiddish, because he took a ship from Kiel. Kiel is in Germany, to England. And they said, don't speak Yiddish, because if you speak Yiddish, they would know you're Jewish. So just speak German. But he saw, when he took the ship, he saw many, how do you call it, ravens or crows, or no, seagulls. And the word for seagull in German is Möwe, like Mövenpick, Möwe. But he couldn't say Möwen, which means seagulls, because he thought that Möwen was a Yiddish word which means maven. Maven means an expert. So instead of saying viele Möwen, he said viele Sachverständigen, so many experts. I said, excuse me, Entschuldigung, and said, viele Experten, oder? Many experts. He translated from the Yiddish maven, which means expert, from Hebrew mevin. Mevin is somebody who understands. Lehavin is to understand. But then they said, Entschuldigung, and he said, sorry, viele Möwen, and then because of that, Stephen, every time his father was playing like I know better than you, etc., he said, "Oh, don't be such a seagull." So for him, seagull means a maven, or an expert. So it's just like a familiar lect. And I was looking behind me to see if my child is behind me, but I see that your child is behind. Okay, that's a lovely child. That's wonderful. So Stephen is extremely acute when it comes to language. When I brought him to Churchill College, Cambridge, which is my college in Cambridge, we had a ping pong discussion of like 3 hours, like a linguistic joke, a linguistic joke, a linguistic point, a linguistic point. It was just like 3 hours, tack, 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 like tennis. It was amazing. So I enjoy seeing him.
Well, since I got interrupted, I would have to say that, part of my interest in this topic started with a book called Fulfillment of Prophecy. And it's a life story of Eliezer Ben-Yehuda. And I was looking into it. This was before I discovered you, actually, in your book, because I attempted the same thing with my child. I decided I wasn't going to speak English when I raised my child. He spoke Russian with his mom, and I reared him speaking Greek. And I had this intellectual fascination with what the experimentation, which sort of was like borderline child abuse in retrospect, of Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, basically raising his child in a language that he didn't speak natively, right? And I've been through that. So I went through that with my child, where basically every time he would learn a new word, when he started talking around from 1 to 2, had this vocabulary explosion. My routine was basically I would go through my phone and I would just I would whip out my phone and record every single new word that he said. The word would go into a database, and I gradually just when I was tracking with graphs and stuff, his vocabulary acquisition every single month, basically from the time he started talking. And I was on the fence at one point because I was studying Greek, but I was studying the entire spectrum of Greek. So I was learning how to communicate, how to, speak and listen in modern Greek, but also how to read and write in ancient Greek. And I was learning Homer, and I was reading Plato, and I was reading the New Testament. I was really just trying to cast a really wide net. And I wasn't sure what kind of Greek I wanted to teach my son, because part of me wanted to do the Ben-Yehuda route and raise a speaker of ancient Greek, basically. I wanted to teach him to, have him be my practice partner for ancient Greek and kind of revive ancient Greek through a child, which is now it's being done a little bit in Greece. We can get to that. But ultimately I fell back on I just want to teach him modern Greek because there are all these cartoons he can watch. There are all these great children's books. And ultimately what Ben-Yehuda did with his son was prevent him from socializing with other children and force him to just sort of speak Hebrew in this bubble until he finally, I think his first word was Abba, right? He said dad, and that's when he started to realize, okay, it's working now. But ultimately I don't know if that was the best thing to do for a child. So my child learned Greek from me. Within a few years, by the time he was 3, he basically outclassed me. He had better pronunciation than me. He absorbed vocabulary much faster and much more efficiently than me. It was really this stark contrast between my sort of adult language learning brain and what was clearly a high performance language learning machine that a child is. And I wanted to sort of ask you, what was your journey to what was your native language? What was your first experience learning a foreign language? Did you grow up bilingual? Because I know that right now you're kind of a hyper polyglot, right? Walk me through all of the languages that you've acquired over your lifetime and how you got into them.
Well, it will take too long, but
briefly, run through it real quick. Yeah. How you got to where you are now, which I don't, you got a dozen languages under your belt, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. So look, Firstly, I'm a hyper polyglot, not because I'm trying to break a record, like to know the. Absolutely not. In fact, I don't care too much about the number of languages I'm fluent in. We're talking about like 13. But what I care about these days is assisting people who would like to reconnect with their heritage language that had been subject to linguicide or language killing. So I am actually fluent in languages that unfortunately do not have too many speakers, like Bangala, Aboriginal language in South Australia. It was killed around 1960. When I say killed, I mean children were taken out of home and were not allowed to speak the language. And then you have a person like Anthony Forster, who said in 1843, the natives would be sooner civilized if their language was extinct. So this is an ideology of linguicide, language killing. But you have a lot of glottophagy as well when, let's say, an Aboriginal language in Australia, like Pitjantjatjara, is actually eating another Aboriginal language called Yankunytjatjara, because Yankunytjatjara and Pitjantjatjara are actually related to each other. It's a little bit like Spanish and, say, Italian. Just imagine Spain kind of takes over the world and then it kind of eats Italian, and all the Italians speak Spanish instead of Italian, which would be easy because as an Italian speaker, my father was a survivor from Italy. I can understand most of the Romance languages, even Romanian, with a little bit of knowledge of Slavonic languages. So my childhood, to answer your question, Stephen, was in I was born in Tel Aviv, but then moved to Eilat, which is now the southernmost of Israel, southernmost city of Israel. But at the time, we had Sinai Desert. So when I make a trip down memory lane, I need a passport, a visa, and a certificate that there are no terrorists like Al Qaeda, etc. Because now it's part of Egypt; it's not part of Israel. So my childhood was actually in what is now known as Egypt, which is ironic. I spoke to the Bedouins in Bedouin Arabic. So instead of saying ruh, ruh minhon, or ruh, like go, or idhab, which is the fusha, the language of the written text, I said goder, goder, goder from English, go there. So they say goder, goder. So what I'm saying is that as a child, I already was very attuned to dialectal differences between the fusha, the modern standard Arabic, the Ammiya, the spoken Arabic, the vernacular, and dialects like a Bedouin Arabic, etc. My father spoke to his father in Italian, so I was kind of interested in that language. At the age of 8, I started learning Hebrew. Now, I make this distinction. I saw in the chat that somebody asked whether an Israeli can understand the Bible. No, an Israeli cannot understand the Bible. Of course, if you ask an Israeli, they will tell you, oh, it's a piece of cake. We understand, no problem whatsoever. But as a linguist, as a scientist, I can tell you that Israelis misunderstand the Bible without realizing it. So if you're looking for the best Bible reader, don't ask Israelis, because it's a little bit like asking, say, a Spaniard to read Italian. So, of course, they will understand some of it, but they will completely misunderstand, like, I remember when I spoke to a Spanish woman, I asked her, are you embarrassed? Eres embarazada, and of course it meant, are you pregnant? I didn't know that. So coming back to Hebrew, I studied Hebrew at the age of 8, Tanakh, so a Bible, Hebrew Bible, apropos cross Bible. And I remember, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, ve'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu. This is Genesis 1, Bereshit, so at the beginning of. That's what it means, at the beginning of what? This is Bereshit. At the beginning of, created God sky and earth. But sky and earth, no. I grew up to understand it's not sky and earth, it's cosmos, it's world. So why? It's a merism. Merism means that you refer to the whole through the extremes. So, for example, when I say zaken vataf in Hebrew, which means old and baby, I don't mean old and babies. I mean old babies and also 54-year-olds and also 45-year-olds. I mean everybody. But I use the extremes to refer to the whole. So sky and earth, shamayim va'aretz, means world. So it's not et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, it means the world. So why does he not say olam? Because olam in the Bible, as opposed to Israeli, means eternity. In Israeli, olam means cosmos or world. And then va'aretz like that tohu vavohu. Most Israelis understand tohu vavohu as chaos, mess, balagan. No, it's the opposite. Tohu vavohu means nothing and nothing. So there is nothing to make chaos out of. So it was leer. In fact, when I read Yiddish, the Yiddish Bible, I can understand the Bible better than if I read it in Hebrew, because in Hebrew I would think that tohu vavohu is the Israeli sense. So what I'm trying to say is that Israelis can read the Bible, but they read it as if it were written in Israeli, which is a revival language, which is based not only on Hebrew, but also on Yiddish, also on many other languages. So the result is very bad. Now, the third, the fourth, or the fifth language I learned was Arabic. So this was at the age of 10. Then English. So English is my 13th or and then eventually Yiddish and German. And so when I go to Germany, I can, start speaking in German. People will think I'm German. Like, meine Großmutter ist in Hamburg born. My grandmother was born in Hamburg. But so because I had some Hamburg background as well, and then because I love languages, and fortunately I have the 7 characteristics required to be a foreign language learner. The 7 characteristics are musicality. I'm extremely musical. You don't need to be like a pianist, but you need to be music. Mathematical, outstanding memory, high EQ, emotional quotients, high IQ, shamelessness, which is a problem of youth in Asia. So as a generalization, my Chinese students in China, they're afraid of losing face. Whereas as a generalization, and please forgive my generalization, I'm a linguist. A language is a generalization ipso facto, because a language is an abstract ensemble of idiolects, sociolects, and other lects. So when people say, oh, you're generalizing, of course, I'm a linguist. So as a generalization, Israelis, Jews are more about guilt than about shame, as a generalization. So I do not sleep well at night if I feel that I offended somebody, but I sleep well at night if I feel that somebody thinks I'm a fuckwit. Forgive my French, pardon my French. So what I'm saying is that shamelessness is very important, and the most important characteristic is motivation. If you don't have motivation, you will not learn any language. So I'm not that motivated to speak like 100 languages fluently. I mean, why? I mean, it's not.
Okay, well, let's do this. So rather than run through the history, because I know that's going to take a while, where are you at right now in terms of ranking from your strongest language to your weakest? Let's do that.
Okay, so my strongest would be Israeli. Then it would probably be Italian. Then it would probably be English, because I do a lot in English. Then it would probably be German, Arabic, Yiddish, Hebrew, Aramaic, ancient Greek, like Kratinos, for example. Apropos what you said about your child, I hope your child knows that beta eta is pronounced not as V, but as ba, because Kratinos says about the sheep, that they bleat beta eta. Now, if you write beta eta today, every Greek would say V, T. But they say, what do you mean? It was obviously bad. That's the only way I convince modern Greeks. So after that,
I lost count. That's 6. Is that 6?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, there were more than 6. Then Spanish and Bangla and Adnyamatna, which is an Aboriginal language. And at the bottom, you can find also Asian languages like Mandarin. So yeah, look,
So
I mean, in my CV there is like I put like fluent, semi-native, so semi-native, fluent. I mean, all the languages together there are probably 30, but there are many of beginner like. Ghana, which is an Aboriginal language, I'm not fluent. I'm a beginner, but of course, if you give me enough time, I can read it. So look, it's a spectrum.
yeah.
It's a little bit like dialects. When people say, what is the difference between language and dialect? I mean, Friulian, is it a dialect? Is it a language? Setuvenska sutas kretis la kelormian soterat. This is Friulian, as opposed to cosa tamaniate katavatto mal in Neapolitan, which is a language as well. I mean, so I know Neapolitan. Is it a language? Should I count it? Should I not count it? There was a very clever guy, Weinreich. He said, a Sprach is a dialect mit an Armee und a flot. A language is a dialect with an army and a navy. And therefore, so somewhere between 13 and 30.
So, yeah, 13 and 30. Wow. So for me, I can just say, just for reference, since you totally outclassed me, English is native. I started studying Russian when I was 14. I have a bachelor's degree in Russian, so that's where the bulk of my actual formal training is. I studied Old Church Slavonic sort of as a side hobby during college, after college. That was my first experience studying a dead language, which we'll talk about, a liturgical language, right? That I couldn't actually go out and speak with people, but it was sort of informed by my understanding of Russian. And then I learned Spanish to a pretty decent conversational level. Then I dabbled in French, and at one point was fairly conversational, but it just got super rusty, and I I hardly counted in the list anymore in my hierarchy. And then Greek, which I've been doing for the past 10 years, in both sort of varieties of the language, which is obviously ancient Greek, modern Greek, basically no boundaries. I do the whole spectrum. Now, I first heard about your work. And it's kind of ironic is that the first person that I heard citing you or citing the statistics that you gave in Revivalistics was somebody named Dr. David Amon Hillman. And if you recall, this is basically a classicist with a PhD who is a con artist who lies about language habitually online and has this cult following. And one of the biggest lies that he tells, and I don't believe, I say lie because I don't think he actually believes it's true. I think it's just his thing, is that Hebrew is fake. And so he has there are multiple angles that he takes on this. But the main thing is that he puts out there that the Septuagint, and including the first 5 books of the Bible, of the Torah, that it was originally written in Greek and then translated into Hebrew, and that Hebrew, in biblical classical Hebrew, is actually kind of like a fake conlang, that only had 8. So the reason your work comes up is because in Revivalistics on page let's see what page is it, 112. This is where you point out that the number of attested biblical Hebrew words is, in your calculation here, 8,679, of which 1,480 are hapax legomena, meaning they only occur once in the corpus. So if that word were missing from our manuscripts, we wouldn't even know that it existed, right? Like it's a very, very sort of
not only that, Stephen, hapax legomena means that because it only appears once, we can discuss forever what the meaning of the word is. Because think about it, you only hear, for example, if I tell you tchelet, you might think it's a color, you might think it's a cloth, you might think it's the animal that dies, it can be anything. So, or ekdach. Ekdach nowadays means pistol, of course, in Israeli, but ekdach in the Bible, needless to say, did not mean pistol. It was a hapax legomenon, and we can discuss forever what exactly it meant. So the point of the almost 1,500, or let's say some people, they just say 2,000, hapax legomena, because there are some words that appear twice. So also it's kind of a little, so it's like semi-hapax legomena. The point is that we do not know what they meant.
Yeah. Well, and so I can say that in my experimentation, my sort of Eliezer Ben-Yehuda style child experimentation with my own son, I know I have very clear records of this, of basically the explosion of vocabulary that happens if you're charting. Like a kid learns mama and dada, and then like, the next word may be food or something like that, really basic stuff. And then around age 3, they get this explosion of vocabulary where like the difference between a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old may be a dozen words, and then a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old is like hundreds of words, right? And it just keeps going exponentially. It's a hockey stick graph of when a child is learning words. And I got to the point where I think around age 4, I stopped counting because it was just the words were coming out. So I just couldn't pull out my phone and record every single one, right? It was just the vocabulary acquisition and child language acquisition happened so rapidly at one point that my database basically capped out around 4,000 words.
Right,
and I'm
right.
talking about lemmas. And it really depends on how it's like fast and faster. Those are the same word. But, sometimes like a noun form and an adjective form could be counted separately. Like I had my own counting method of what constitutes a lexeme or lemma, right? A lemma. And I could tell that like basically for a young child at that age, I mean, now he's 7 and he probably has double that, right? So basically like once you reach a point where you're quote unquote fluent in a language as a child, 4,000 is you're already you're kicking, right? You're communicating. And then
Absolutely.
when you get
don't forget, Stephen, that in order to read a Chinese newspaper, you need fewer than 4,000 characters, which means that let's say 3,700 characters.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you a very clear idea that in order to discuss world politics and the entire thing, you don't need many more than 5,000. In Bangla, for example, which is the Aboriginal language that I have been reviving together with the Bangla Aboriginal people, we actually have 3,500 words, which is more than enough. But I can tell you that some other languages, even a language with 3 words, are being reclaimed. So there is a language called Nau. There are only 3 words in this language. I can tell you what they are. Gardu is Aboriginal person. Yanmura, white fellow or white person. And Maldabi, devil. Only 3 words. But then if you pinch, you just kind of take 1,000 words from my dictionary of Bangla together with Clamor Wilhelm Schumann, then you have 1,003, and then you pinch 1,000 from another, so then you have 2,000. So because these languages are related, so it's a little bit like, say, Swedish died, nobody knows Swedish, there is no resources in Swedish, but then you say, okay, let's take Norwegian or the Norwegians, or let's take Danish. So it's a little bit like that. But coming back to your son, you're absolutely right. 4,000 words is more than enough. Now, I don't know David, the one that you mentioned. I'm happy that he mentioned me because this is how I met you. So, but needless to say,
that's the irony, right?
I completely disagree with his argument that Hebrew was a fake language. I think Hebrew was a language that biblical Hebrew, I do believe it reflects the language spoken of the time. I did hear many scholars claiming that, it was a written language and therefore we cannot be sure that it was reflecting the language. Why should we say? Usually you write in a language that reflects the language spoken. Of course, sometimes you have diglossia in the sense that you don't write exactly. So I can say the F word when I talk to you, but I will not write it, etc. But by and large, there is no reason for me to believe that people will invent a language 3,000 years ago just in order to write some. No, I mean, they wrote in the language that they spoke. And this is why you have so many variations within the Bible. You have so many dialects, you have so many temporalities. So I don't believe in the minimalist program that tells you that the Bible was written in one go, in 500 BC. No, I think that it was written like maybe 1000 something BC until 500 BC. Sometimes suddenly you have Aramaic, suddenly you have Greek suddenly, I mean, if it were a fake language, then why have Aramaic? Why have Greek? You know, I once gave a lecture and said that the Quran, the Muslim Bible, the Quran is full of Hebraisms, Hellenisms, Aramaisms, etc., and some to Hamasniks or whatever. Excuse me, the Quran was written in perfect Arabic. You know, it's a pure, and it was written by Allah. And then I said, are you saying that Allah did not speak Hebrew? Are you saying that Allah did not speak Greek? Are you saying that Allah did not speak Aramaic? So in other words, this is the way to get out. So when you actually have all these elements in the Bible, it actually points out that it was not a fake language. It was a natural language. It was an alive and kicking language. So whoever you mentioned earlier, I don't know him, I have to say. And and obviously I disagree with him.
So when I heard this, I heard you being cited regarding the vocabulary size of ancient Hebrew. I reached out to you, we connected, you shared a lot of things for me to read through, especially Edward Ullendorf's book. And I bought Revivalistics, I read Revivalistics, and I basically prepared a script for a video that you reviewed. You reviewed the portion of it that relates to Hebrew. So the disclaimer is that this video is in the description. It's one that I produced in 2024 on the Cross Bible YouTube channel. So make sure everybody's subscribed. Let's go through some of what I did, because you vetted the script. So I know for a fact that you approved it, but maybe I got some things wrong. I think it's going to be fairly educational to sort of walk back through this. And for the people who haven't seen it yet, or maybe even for the people who have, this is very much derivative to, or indebted to your work in Revivalistics and then your revisions of the script. So I just want to show some people some of the work that really you're credited for, and I credit you by name here. And then it'll help us establish some of the basics, and then I'm going to get to some super chats and maybe some other regular chats of people. So let's talk about words, tokens, and lemmas, and let me know if you have any. I hope everybody can hear this. When discussing vocabulary words, there's one issue we need to dispense with when it comes to terminology. Let's establish what we mean by the word word in the context of lexicography. When we discuss a corpus of texts with millions of words, we are referring specifically to a concept called tokens. Take the following sentence as an example. The girls like the boy, but the boy's friend only likes one girl. We could say, putting it simply, that the first sentence has 5 words and the second sentence has 8 words. But since some of the words here are repetitive, we can be more specific by referring to the total number of words using the term tokens. There are a total of 13 tokens in this example. When comparing the sizes of different books, a thick book usually has more tokens than a thin book. Here we're simply referring to groups of letters separated by spaces and punctuation. However, there's another key concept that's particularly important for inflected languages like Greek. If we're talking about the unique words in a book, those might be described as lexical items, which make up individual entries in the dictionary. And each lexical item consists of a head word listed in alphabetical order. This is called a lemma, or lima in Greek. So when we count the unique lemmas, or limata, within a text, duplicates don't count. Going back to our example, the girls like the boy, but the boy's friend only likes one girl. The definite article the is counted as 3 different tokens, but only a single lemma. The singular noun girl and the plural girls are 2 different tokens, but only 1 lemma. Verb conjugations such as like and likes are different tokens, but belong to the same lemma in the dictionary. The noun boy and the possessive boys with an apostrophe are different tokens, but the same lemma. But is only 1 token and 1 lemma. The same applies to the noun friend, to the adverb only, and the number 1 is a single lemma. So in this basic example, it helps to differentiate between the total number of tokens, which is 13, and the total number of lemmas, which is only 7. A text will typically have many more tokens than lemmas. especially in an inflected language where each lemma has many different grammatical forms. So this, I hope, was at least comprehensible to people who speak English. But clearly, when we're working with a language like Hebrew, there's not a one-to-one correspondence. A lot of it depends on how you're counting, right? And so in your book, when you talk about 8,679 lemmas in biblical Hebrew, not counting the Mishnah, right? Can you elaborate a little bit on sort of what that total represents and what the difference is between, because if we're talking about tokens, we're talking about every single word in the Bible from cover to cover, right, in the Old Testament. So I hope my breakdown here was illustrative. Maybe you can kind of help flesh this out a little bit. Oh, your audio, you're mute. You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me,
Yes.
Stephen? Yeah,
Yes.
sorry.
Yeah.
So, firstly, just one comment. The only thing that bothered me is limata instead of lemata. So, but I am an ancient Greek person, and I know that the modern Greek person would say li instead of le. But for me, the eta is lemata. So lemata.
Well, and if you were in seminary, you would probably say lemata. And the thing is,
You're right.
And it's not,
No.
and the issue is not that I am I have some kind of that I'm blocked, I can't say le mata. It's just that, some people would say there needs to be some phonemic vowel length in the I need to hold it a little bit longer. And for me, it's just very natural to say limata because that's just what it's called in Greece.
I meant lemata. The reason I said lemata, by the way, is that in Hebrew or in Israeli these days, lemata means below. And I saw this, I saw this word below, so it was kind of a it was priming lemata. So lemala means up, and lemata means down, but it's lemata. You're absolutely right. But
and we can also
lemata.
pluralize it. We can pluralize it as if it were an English word and just say lemmas and call it a day, and not try to be overly Greek about it, right? We don't need. We can just say octopuses and lemmas, and we can put English plurals on things, even though technically, we can say cosmoses instead of cosmoi and things like that.
Exactly. So, but coming back to your perspicacious question. I think that the way that I look at it is that if you have, for example, bracha, bracha means blessing, then birchatcha, which means your blessing, would be the same lemma, just a different conjugation. So your blessing, because in Hebrew, as opposed to English, when we say your blessing, it's one word. In English, it's two words. Now, what is interesting is that in Israeli, because it's more analytic than Hebrew, we use two words, like in English. So, habracha shelcha. So, in other words, Hebrew, which is the language of the Bible, is much more synthetic. So, because it is synthetic, it puts together, for example, bracha, which means blessing, and your blessing, birchatcha. So, from my perspective, birchatcha will not be another word, it will be the same lemma. So in the dictionary, you will say beracha, and then there will be conjugation, birchati, birchatcha, birchatam, birchatenu. Now, in the Bible, of course, all of these can appear, but if we count them as 10 instead of 1, I think it's misleading.
Yeah, so those are basically more like tokens if we count all of those different forms.
Sort of. It's like tokens would be because birchatcha can be mentioned 100 times.
Yeah.
So then the token is like 100 times birchatcha, and so it's kind of you have type. So in a way you have like lemma, then you have type, then you have token. So lemma for me is bracha. Type is bracha, birchatcha, birchatenu, birchatam, and birchatcha being 100 times in the Bible is the token. So I have 3 levels.
Now, you talked a little bit about synthetic and analytic language, and I think that went over a lot of people's heads. So we may need to back up and sort of explain what we mean by the difference between an analytic language and a synthetic language.
For example, in Hebrew, when I say the mother of the child, I say em hayeled, mother, the child. It's called construct state when I put noun and noun together. Mother, the child means the mother of the child. But in Israeli, I don't say em hayeled. It would be very rare for somebody to say Ra'iti et em hayeled. He would say instead, Ra'iti, I saw, et ha'ima shel hayeled, the mother of the child. So
Okay.
the mother of the child is more analytic in the sense that it's like Chinese. Chinese is very analytic, like it doesn't have, for example, birchatcha. So bracha means blessing. Habracha shelcha means the blessing yours. This is Israeli. But in Hebrew, we say birchatcha, which is one word, which means blessing and then you. But you is together with a blessing. So it's synthetic because it is not separate words. It's the same word. Now, you have languages like Turkish, for example, that are agglutinative. So agglutinative means you can add many beleten, so bele, to learn by heart. T is to cause something to learn by heart, and n is like a nominal suffix. So you can add many things like anti-disestablishment, Arianism. Yeah, so you have 7 morphemes. Anti-disestablishmentarianism, and all of it is one word, right? So this is agglutinative. Now, Hebrew is not agglutinative, it is synthetic, but Israeli is much more analytic because Yiddish is much more analytic. So Israeli is more analytic because of the Yiddish component. So em hayeled, ha'ima shel hayeled, imcha, mother, you, your mother, ha'ima shelcha, the mother of you. So in other words, we are more analytic in Israeli.
So, yeah, and so similarly in Greek, so a synthetic language like Greek or Russian, right, we call those inflected languages, right? So, imitir tu pedos, like the mother of the child, or in modern Greek, imitera tu pediu, right?
Yes.
Those words are taking case endings and inflecting in order to represent their function in the sentence, like is it a direct object, is it indirect object, is it possessive? Whereas in English, because we are now we have evolved into an analytic language from our predecessor Proto-Germanic, which was a more synthetic language, we only retain what you see on screen here: boy apostrophe s, boys, right? That is effectively the only artifact in our language of what used to be a genitive case, right? That is effectively the genitive case. We could say, instead of the boy's friend, we could say the friend of the boy, and that would be an analytic construction, right? And
exactly. And you see, in English, you do have residues like doomsday, like you say doomsday, and everybody who looks at the etymology, it's the day of the doom. But it's not productive like in German. In German, if I want to say, Verkehr in German is transport, Verbindungen, the links. So the links of transport would be Verkehrsverbindungen. So Verkehrsverbindungen is one word, and I can make many new words. It's generative, it's productive. But in English, I cannot make a word like doomsday, like boy's mom as one word, or kid's dad. I cannot say the kid's dad, KIDSDAD, the dad of the kid. I cannot do it. But in German, you can. So German is still like that, whereas English, which is obviously a Germanic language, is not like that anymore. But doomsday is a residue of that.
Now, I want to briefly touch on the idea, because since we were talking about sort of corpus studies of what it looks like to have a certain number of words in a corpus, and because this whole thing arose, the reason why your work came up and the reason I started investigating this whole conspiracy theory about Hebrew being a ostensibly fake language was the idea that 8,000 words was actually somehow unusual. And in that compared to Greek, that Greek has so many more words than Hebrew, like as this one-to-one comparison. And when I looked into it, what I found was, even though the TLG database does log a significant amount of words that survive in Greek, and we're talking about 126 million tokens, effectively, right? Which breaks down into 1.8 million unique word forms and 279,000 lemmas. The reason why that number is so high, it's artificially inflated because it's tracking vocabulary going all the way back from Homer to modern Greek, right? So effectively, even though, yes, there's a continuity in the language, if you just look at a sliver of it, which would be Homer, you basically have a corpus size of 9,000 or so, almost 10,000 lemmas. Basically, it's like the Iliad and the Odyssey, that particular corpus, which was the foundational literature of Greek culture, that's basically about the size of the Hebrew Bible in terms of just the number of lemmas, right? Like it's basically like not that. The only reason we have more than that in Greek is because people continued writing after, and every single form of the language got more and more words. And you get Plato is writing with a larger vocabulary than Homer. He's around 13,000 lemma, which is already larger than the corpus of the Hebrew Bible. And then Aristotle explodes the vocabulary because he's writing on like all kinds of different topics. He's up to 20,000 lemmas according to the TLG. And then once you get to the Hebrew Bible, at least the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, you're at about 16,000 lemma, but that number is off because they're double counting the book of Daniel. They're counting the Apocrypha in there. So I just wanted to point this out really quickly that, it's that number, even though it sounds like a huge disparity, like 8,000 versus 240,000, but it's artificial. It's not real.
Well, and let us not forget that English has 1 million lemma, lemmas, and Israeli has more than 100,000 lemma. So it does not mean for a moment that an average Israeli is more intelligent than, say, the writers of the Bible. So, in other words, you can, with 8,000 lemmas, you can say anything you want to say. So, nobody should use the number of words unless you have like 3 words or 5 words, the languages, and you can do nothing with as kind of a manifestation of anything other than what was needed at the time. So in Hebrew, for example, we had no word for blue. Now in ancient Greek, there is no word for blue. In Latin, classical Latin, there is no word for blue. This does not mean for a moment that the ancient Hebrews, the ancient Greeks, and the ancient Latins were idiots or they were colorblind. They saw exactly what we see. There is no difference in physics. They saw exactly what we see today. However, there was no need for a category of the color blue, because blue was not something that you need to know if the fig is blue before you eat it, because otherwise you die. Of course, it's nice to know whether something is green. It has to do with survival. But the fact that the sea was blue or the sky was blue did not change your survival chances. And therefore, there was no category in the language for blue. But this does not mean that the people are primitive or they have less understanding of the world. It's just that the blue category is completely irrelevant for their survival or for their art. Now, the Egyptians did have a blue. Why? Because they had a lot of artifacts from blue. They also had the blue thing for the eyes, etc. So it was part of the of the ecology. So you see, language reflects the ecology of the people who live there. So nowadays, when we have ChatGPT, we have AGI, ASI, etc. Obviously, any child can look up anything he or she wants from all over the world, etc. You need all the names for countries in the world. You have like almost 200 countries. I mean, in the past, I mean, how many countries did people know about? You know? So you need more words, but it doesn't mean much about intelligence. It doesn't mean much about advancement, etc.
So another interesting concept that I wanted to touch on real quick is Zipf's law, because it also sort of plays into this idea of corpus linguistics. Now, the thing that's interesting about Zipf's law is that it applies to just about any language, and the what you're seeing here in this sort of in this graph, right, is that on the left-hand side you have the frequency of words, and on the bottom axis you have their ranking, and the most common words in the language are basically the ones that appear most in the corpus, right? And they're directly like inverse. So the most common words in English are the, of, and, to, a, in, is, that, it, for, right? Like they are going to appear on any book. Like just turn open a page of your book, and that's going to be the scaffolding for the language, right? Whereas once you get into really, really rare vocabulary, right? And I have just a sort of short list that I put together here. It's kind of unfair to count these words as full-fledged members of the English language, because I don't like, okay, anemometry. You know what that means? I don't want to quiz you, but basically like anemometry for somebody who knows Greek, it's oh, this is super easy. This is the measurement of the wind, right? Or onechophagy, right? Or I'm sorry, onechophagy. So most people would be like, you know, I'm working on my onechophagy. I really need to stop my onechophagy, which is like chewing on your nails, right? Or you know, all of the phobias are from Greek, right? Chironophobia is you know, that you're afraid of lightning, right? My son needs to work on his cacography, right? Like because it's handwriting. It's like bad handwriting, right? Xerostomia. I have xerostomia, right? Like, cause you know, I smoke too much weed and I have dry mouth, right? So rhinorrhea. Oh God, rhinorrhea. That's a bloody nose. Okay. So you could argue that these are not English words. They're extremely rare. They hardly ever come up. Most people in the chat don't know what cephalgia is, right? You say you have a headache, but there's a Greek word for all of that stuff because it's advanced. It's medical terminology. So once you start baking into the language, to the word count of a language, these words that really have no currency at all, either because they're super old or they're super technical. It's like, yeah, that's why, as you mentioned, English has a million lemmas, because the people who put together the Oxford English Dictionary are going around and collecting all of these words. But when you analyze any corpus, you're going to get this sort of logarithmic graph that reflects Zipf's law, where it's like, the only ones that you're really going to see above the surface are the ones that are going to be in this frequency above 8, right? Like you're going to see the thes, and you're going to see all the common vocabulary, the stuff that is going to get into that database of my son's vocabulary when he's 4 years old, right? The 4,000, and then maybe the 8,000, 10,000 when you're an adult, right? Maybe 20,000 when you graduate college and you're learning a whole bunch of synonyms, because in English we can say we're late, or we could say we're tardy. And it's like they mean the same thing, but one is an advanced word that comes from Latin. The other is like a sort of common word that comes from Germanic. And so ranking languages in terms of their vocabulary size is just sort of like, it's just a silly endeavor. It's just like, it's not.
Well, it reminds me of two things. Firstly, it reminds me, Stephen, of somebody mentioned my fat Greek big wedding or whatever, when he says that everything comes from Greek.
Yeah.
And then she says, what about kimono? And said, oh, himona. Himona is in Greek winter, and in the winter it's very cold, and you need to have a kimona, etc. Let us not forget. By the way, cacography is the opposite of calligraphy. So
Yeah, exactly.
And calligraphy, many people know. So look, I think that in English, 29% is French, 29% of vocabulary is Latin. So what is it? 58% of the vocabulary in English is absolutely non-Germanic. Then you have 6% from Greek, only 6%. So of course you have 58 plus 6, 64% are kind of, like more academic, more a little bit. So like I say perspicacious, perspicacious. I could say keen or sharp, but you can always choose the Latinism, and you can choose the Germanism. The Germanism, by and large, would be more
Common,
kind of hoi polloi, from Greek, nomis, or the masses, or whatever, and the Greek or the Latin or the French would be a little bit kind of more highfalutin. The point is that in French, whenever they criticize le weekend or le computer instead of ordinateur, etc., there was a very clever guy who wrote a letter to the Académie Française in English, but only using French and Latin words within the English against this kind of purism. What is beautiful about English is that it absorbs from everywhere. It's multicultural in the real sense, not the wokest sense. It doesn't care. Everything is there. You do ski, great. So we take the word ski. You want to have tsunami. We have an earthquake and there is a tsunami. We'll take tsunami from Japanese, etc. So that's beautiful. That's multicultural. I was interviewed on the radio by somebody called Peter Gers in South Australia, and he received a complaint from a woman in South Australia, Australia Australis, because Australia in Latin means south. So I'm in the south of the south. And the complaint was, Peter Gers, you're not Jewish, but you use many Yiddish words, and this is appropriation, which is not politically correct, and you're not allowed to use Yiddish words because you're not Jewish. And he asked me what I thought, and I said, this is kind of ridiculous. I, as a Jew, give you the imprimatur to use whatever Yiddish word you want. I feel actually very happy when a person like you uses a Yiddish word, regardless of being Jewish, Ashkenazic, whatever. It's beautiful. So this kind of osmosis, or this kind of taking up diffusion of words, etc., is beautiful. And don't forget that at the time of the Bible, I mean, I don't know, again, 600 years, whatever. This is not a discussion today. How was the Bible written? By how many people, etc.
Yeah.
Don't forget that God created the linguist. This is the Tower of Babel. But linguists killed God. I mean, what do I mean? I mean, the moment a linguist looked at the Old Testament and said, oh, there is a mistake here. Oh, this is written in a different dialect. Oh, this is a different style. I mean, this is the beginning, if you want, of atheism. When Nietzsche was a philologist, when he said God is taught, God is the. So when you look at the Bible, at the Hebrew Bible, it was written by people. If these people knew 5,000 words, that's wonderful. And by the way, maybe not all the words they knew made it to the Bible, because again, it reflects reality, but it's not everything that is in reality. So we do not know exactly how many words they had. Now, if you talk to Americans or British or whatever today, I think, as you said very perspicaciously, how many words would they use? 4,000.
Yeah.
Well,
and you saw that if we have 20,000 lemma in Aristotle, but only 12,000 in Plato, does that mean that when Plato picked up something that Aristotle wrote, he didn't understand like half of it? You know, like, no, he never had the occasion to use some of the words that Aristotle was using. Aristotle was talking about biology. He was talking. So it's like, if all we had was Plato, if like the future subsequent generations just scrapped Aristotle completely and the Greek language died, let's just hypothetically, and all we had was Plato and Homer, maybe, you would have basically a situation like you had in Hebrew, which would be just a very narrow corpus that's not like branching out into the sciences. It's religious corpus, and you got a limited vocabulary inherent in that corpus. And to that point, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and this is a fortiori when you say in Yagan, in Tierra del Fuego, the country of fire in Chile, Argentina, when you say Mami Sapinatapai, it's one word, Mami Sapinatapai, but I can say it in English to you, what it means, and you will understand it. So I will use 26 words, but I have these words because, coming back to Zip's law, these words are much more common and frequent as opposed to Mami Sapinatapai, which is a Gastwort or a guess word in English. It means to look one at the other, hoping that the other side would initiate something that both of us really want to do. But so far, nobody has had the guts to initiate. Now, I don't know, I used like 26 words for that. You understand what I want to say. The fact that you don't know the word Mami Sapinatapai with this which exists as sin in Hebrew, this Boshem balsamos, this like in Welsh, Mami Sapinatapai. You don't need to know this word in order to understand the concept of Mami Sapinatapai. Now, if you speak Yagan, and I don't know how many words there are in Yagan, I can assure you that there are fewer than in Greek, but they have a word Mami Sapinatapai that Greek does not have. Greek does not have a word Mami Sapinatapai. So what does it say? It says that in their ecology, in their culture, there was once a need for that, or somebody came up with this word, which is beautiful. This is why we want to have a world which is full of languages. But this does not mean for a moment that one language is superior than another language. I mean, I deal with Aboriginal languages. Many of them have only 3 words for numbers. For example, in Bangla, Guma, Gudara, Gaba. 1, 2, 3. And then after that, it's Ngala. Ngala means many. 1, 2, 3, many. Guma, Gudara, Gaba. Ngala. So you might say, you cannot be a mathematician if you're Aboriginal. Well, my friend Dan Shechtman is a Nobel laureate in chemistry from the Technion from Israel. He studied chemistry in a revival language called Israeli. Israeli, 120 years ago, was absolutely not the right language for a chemistry Nobel Prize, but he got the Nobel Prize in chemistry, having studied chemistry in Israeli. So what I'm trying to say to you is that it doesn't matter how many words you start with, and it doesn't matter whether you do mathematics, etc. No, it is just a reflection of your ecology. If you're a hunter-gatherer, why do you need to count more than 3? You just kill 1 kangaroo, 2 kangaroos max. Why do you need to kill 1,000 kangaroos? You don't have an abattoir where you actually count the 1,000 tails of kangaroos today, and you need 1, 2, 3, 4. No, you need Guma, Gudara, Gaba, Ngala. That's it. It's enough. It's good for your survival. It's good for your ecology. So language is a reflection of reality. Sometimes, of course, reality is a reflection of language. For example, when I ask a German to describe a bridge, they will tell me a bridge is elegant, a bridge is beautiful. If I ask a Greek or a Hebrew speaker or an Italian speaker to describe a bridge, they would say that a bridge is sturdy, it's strong. And the reason is, of course, the grammatical gender. The grammatical gender in German for a bridge is feminine, die Brücke. But in Italian, il ponte, it's masculine, right?
Yep.
So
feminine in Greek.
In Greek it's feminine. I'm sorry. Yeah, in Greek it's feminine.
But in Russian it's masculine.
Of course, most.
Yeah, most in
So
Russian,
most,
and then Yephira in modern Greek, Gefura in ancient Greek. So
exactly,
I
Gefura.
yeah. I say Yephira. You can say, it's tomato.
So it's I think it's Gefura with a U, right?
It's with the
Gefura.
ypsilon, yeah.
Yeah,
Gefura
Gefura.
or in, but that's the thing is it is the same word effectively. The word never changed. The pronunciation of the word changed. But
Yes.
it's a word that just survived for 3,000 years and just happens to be pronounced Yephira today.
Gefura.
Now,
Yeah.
and so that's the thing. When we look at Greek, we see a continuity where it's just generation after generation. The child learns the parent language, the mother tongue, and it just keeps getting passed down. And there's an unbroken chain of speakers, and then the language just gradually develops. I think you use the term evolve. You use the verb evolve with respect to language change. I try not to, because I feel like that puts a value judgment on the change on the trajectory of the language. It sort of implies that if we're saying that the language is quote unquote evolve, that there's somehow more better, like than
No, but I use evolution only in contradistinction with a revolution. So I say that Israeli is not an organic evolution like Italian is an organic evolution from Latin until today that got the word impeachment from English or the word club from English. This is an organic evolution, whereas Israeli is the result of a hybridic revolution. Because somebody in the chat, I didn't look really at all the chat, but somebody said, yeah, but why don't we call Israeli just modern Hebrew? I mean, like, why why do you say Israeli? Because Israeli is not the result of an organic evolution. By the way, evolution is not about becoming better. It's just about shift happening, like evolution with so I don't have any value judgment for the word evolution. I know that some people
I think colloquially there is an association with just like, oh, I have evolved in the sense like I've come. There is a value judgment that people have at least subconsciously with that term.
Right.
So regarding the chat, I've received some criticism that I ignore the chat too much, and I actually, we have some super chats. So the first super chat that we got in this discussion can help sort of spring us into the heart of the matter, which we sort of danced around for a whole hour. But was Hebrew ever really a dead language, and what does that mean linguistically? And so we talked a little bit about the phenomenon of language death. And I want to get to the timeline because this timeline was very, very much influenced by you. Or at least there's I don't remember which page it's on in your book, but I used this as the foundation of my timeline, and then just sort of expanded on it. So this is based on Revivalistics, and I think you went over this at one point. This is a long time ago. So the periodization that you provide in the book for Hebrew starts out in, like you mark kind of the boundary of what would have been sort of proto-Hebrew, like something before our written record that emerged from Canaanite as some form of the language that we would recognize as a proto-Hebrew, right? That we don't have. And so the spoken Hebrew period that you mark sort of starts out in, theoretically in this sort of 12th, 11th century BC, and the very first evidence we have that I was able to sort of impose onto your timeline is marking the 10th century as the period of like archaic biblical Hebrew, is obviously these artifacts that we don't know really what language they represent. It could be sort of Hebrew, it could be Canaanite. There's not really enough text, and I'm referring specifically to the Ophel Pithos, the Zayit stone, right? Could be Hebrew, could be Phoenician. The Khirbet Ostrakhan could be Canaanite. The Gezer calendar could also be Canaanite, and then
I'll just say that we have from 3,600 years ago, we have a Canaanite comb. This was discovered by a friend of mine between Gaza and Jerusalem, and it has a Yatash. I don't know. I've sent it to you recently. It says So may the lice of this comb will not kind of affect my hair and beard. And this is written in Canaanite, which is the mother of Hebrew.
Yeah.
So we do have proofs of Canaanite, which is very close to Hebrew. So, for example, se'ar is the same word. Se'ar in Israeli means hair.
Yeah.
And this is the same as in Hebrew and the same as in Canaanite. Whereas zakan means beard in Israeli, zakan in Hebrew, but they say zakat with a taf, a zain uf taf. So this is 3,600 years ago. So this is kind of not to be taken lightly. So I said that my DNA is 3,000 years ago, 80% from Canaan. So my ancestors spoke Hebrew. Which is a continuation of Canaanite, just like Aramaic, and which is a sister. And of course, we have all the Semitic languages that are related.
So in your timeline where you go from archaic biblical Hebrew in 10th, 9th, 8th century, and this sort of lines up with the archaeology, Israel Finkelstein sort of starts to put literacy on the map around this period. And this is where you have like the emergence of these ostraca that actually have an identifiable Hebrew in the Paleo-Hebrew script, right? Where you have like the first attestations of the language in the archaeological record, right? Paleo-Hebrew, the Shebna inscription, and mixed in with Old Aramaic, Tel Dan Stele, Mesha Stele. Does this all kind of gel with your research? And am I on the right track here?
Absolutely. Okay. And then Hebrew, unfortunately, dies as a native tongue around 135 AD, which is Bar Kokhba's death. So Bar Kokhba, in a way, if you want, he's the symbolic last native speaker of Hebrew. Of course, we know from the Mishnah, which is the most important book for religious people. Mishnah is kind of the oral history codified in the 2nd century AD. I believe that the Mishnah was codified in the 2nd century AD because the rabbis knew if we don't do it now, it would be too late because we are losing Hebrew. Hebrew is dying. And we know that they call the servant, the female servant, to ask her how you say broom in Hebrew. So they didn't know. And she says, matate is broom, and then we know also that Jesus, who was a rabbi, pake, some kind of crazy things that I saw on Times Square on the 25th of December. Somebody wrote on Times Square in New York, Jesus is a Palestinian, and then he had a kafia, and the Palestinian flag, etc. Well, Jesus was not a Palestinian in the sense of Yasser Arafat. He was a Palestinian with the referent of a rabbi who came from Israel, also known as Palestine. Yeah. So what they did here, by the way, is a very interesting linguistic fallacy. So it's kind of taking the same sense but a different referent. So because one sense can have many references. If I say the professor with the glasses who is speaking right now, I mean, it can be Gil'ad Zuckermann, myself, but if there is another meeting now with another professor, it can be somebody totally different. So the sense is the same sense, but the referent is completely different. What they did in Times Square just several months ago is taking a different referent. But Jesus spoke Aramaic, not Hebrew, as a native tongue. Now, how do I know that? Because I read the New Testament and I saw Eli, Eli, lama shebaqtani. Had he spoken Hebrew, he would have said, Eli, Eli, lama azavtani. God, God, why have you forsaken me? He says, Talitha kumi, instead of Na'ara kumi. Talitha is a young woman. Na'ara is a young woman, a little bit like Parthenos. Apropos Greek, Alma is a young woman. Parthenos in Greek is a young woman. Well, as it happens, it also means a virgin. And then we believe that, Christians believe that Mary was a virgin because of this linguistic beautiful cog. Yeah. So
So if
coming
we,
back,
yeah, the timeline. Coming back to the timeline, specifically with regard to the transition in the exilic period, where it's like not only are the Jews starting to write Hebrew in a different Aramaic square script, but now they're adopting the Aramaic language as the new lingua franca of that region from the Babylonian period, and even the Elephantine papyri we get are mostly in Aramaic. And so it seems like the linguistic death of biblical Hebrew kind of starts here, right? It starts in this post-exilic period with being supplanted by a very, very closely related language, Aramaic.
Yes.
And you get this transition from what you have as standard biblical Hebrew into late biblical Hebrew. And I don't know if you could maybe clarify, because we have Qumran Hebrew, like we have real attestations of Hebrew being used. How do we know it's still a living language, even though it's being supplanted by Aramaic, is what I'm getting at.
So I believe that Hebrew was a living language until the 2nd century AD.
Right.
We know that because we have plenty of people who speak Hebrew, like Bar Kokhba. I mean, Bar Kokhba, who was killed in Beitar by the Romans in 135 AD, was a Hebrew. We have a difference between Judea and Israel, one more Aramaic, one more Hebrew, etc. So there is no reason whatsoever to believe that Hebrew had died prior to the 2nd century AD when the Mishnah is codified. The Mishnah is codified because Hebrew was dying at the time, and we know that it was codified in the 2nd century AD. And following the train of thought that you've just mentioned, the Gemara, which is a very important book as well, is written, I'm talking about the Babylonian Talmud, is written in Aramaic. Why? Because the language at the time of the Jews in Babel, in Iraq, the Mesopotamians, my ancestors who were expelled from Israel, who ended up there before they went to Europe, was Aramaic. And this, by the way, corresponds with your question several dozens of minutes ago about why should we not believe that Hebrew is fake or biblical Hebrew did not reflect. Look, the Gemara is written in Aramaic. Why? Because they spoke Aramaic. So why should I come with this kind of idiotic understanding that the Jews wrote in Hebrew the Bible, but it was not reflecting the language that they spoke? It was a fake Hebrew, like the one that you mentioned. It makes no sense historically. It's not commonsensical. So you usually write in the language you speak at the time. It's true. You have Joseph Conrad, you have Nabokov, you have people who write in another language, not in their native tongue. I wrote Revivalistics in English because this is a lingua franca of the academic world. But by and large, you write in the language that is your native tongue. Now, coming back to your question and coming back to the original question in the chat, why do I say that Israeli is different? Because between 135 AD and 1885 AD, 1,750 years approximately, Hebrew is no one's mother tongue. No one speaks Hebrew as a native tongue. Now, to all the chatters who asked about it, I have a question. When you do not speak your native language, but you speak a language you know as a foreign language, say when you speak English if you're Israeli, or when you speak Latin if you're the Pope, or when you speak ancient Greek if you're a non-native speaker of ancient Greek, unlike your son, etc., can I write a grammar of that language based on your judgments? Absolutely not. Can I write a grammar of Latin based on Wojtyła's Latin? Absolutely not. He makes plenty of mistakes. He doesn't sound native at all. When a person speaks a foreign language, in the case of Hebrew, when I say foreign, I don't mean foreign, not part of your heritage, because, say, an Egyptian Jew in 1000 AD or 1000 CE, of course, he was not a native speaker of Hebrew. It was a foreign language in the brain. So if he got, say, God forbid, a stroke, he could have not communicated in that Hebrew. He could have only communicated in his mother tongues. So I know many people who got a stroke and then they cannot speak in English in Australia. They resort to German or they resort to their original language. Nobody between 135 AD and 1885 AD got a stroke and resorted to biblical Hebrew or to Hebrew. Nobody. So there is a fundamental difference between your mother tongue. This is something I believe, and this is something many linguists believe. Some linguists do not believe it, I have to say. There is a fundamental difference between a mother tongue and a non-mother tongue. Hebrew was no one's mother tongue for 1,750 years. Therefore, it was a walking dead, or if you want, kind of a clinically dead language.
So just to clarify on the timeline, so when we're approaching, so we're at the 6th century BC, the Aramaic script gets adopted, the Aramaic language starts to supplant Hebrew as the common language. Can you describe the shift that happens from spoken Hebrew to using Hebrew as a liturgical language? Like, what is the role of Hebrew's status as the language of the Bible, as a kind of holy language that's elevated above Aramaic for liturgical purposes? How does that contribute to the, let's say, like, put death in quotes, right? The dormancy of the language that happens where all of a sudden babies are not learning to speak it, right? Like, it's no longer a native language, it's the language you learn in synagogue. Like, what is the dynamic there that contributes to a language fossilization, basically, as like, this is a liturgical language now, it's not the common one that you use at the market?
I think that it's very similar to what happens in many Aboriginal communities in Australia today. In Australia, you had 400 Aboriginal languages, distinct Aboriginal languages, and nowadays only 12 are alive and kicking. 12, so it's 3%. 97% were either subject to linguicide, or after a while they were alive, but then some Aboriginal people said to themselves, well, I get all the services in English. I go to the doctor, I need to speak in English. I go to the post office, I need to speak in English. So this is because English is a lingua franca, it's a language of kind of communication. Then you say, I want my kids to be successful in law. Maybe there will be a lawyer, maybe there will be that. So why should I talk to them in Adnyamatna or in languages like Garnet? So very, very gradually, you speak to your kids in that, but they just hear, they don't reply, they respond in English because they go to school in English, and then the next generation, they know a little bit, they can speak to their nonna, they can speak a little bit to their grandmothers, but then the fourth generation, nothing. So it's a very gradual, I think, in the case of course, in the case of Hebrew, I predict, I assume, of course, I cannot prove it because this happened before my time. It was a gradual process of hegemony. So Aramaic becomes the lingua franca and the language of, it's a little bit like in diplomacy before English, it was French. So everybody had to speak French. If you wanted to be a diplomat, you spoke French. But then English, I mean, English is kind of penetrating new. I mean, I'm sure in the future we will have, unfortunately, fewer languages because you have bigger languages. In China, for example, you have many dialects that are being forgotten. Let's say in Shanghai, this is a very prestigious place, but many people come from all over the place to join, and they do not speak Shanghainese, so they have to communicate in Mandarin. After a while, the children of the Shanghainese families, they say, well, why should we speak Shanghainese? We just speak Mandarin, etc. So then after a while, Mandarin is gone. So, I mean, it's not yet, but it's coming. So what I'm trying to say, this is a gradual loss of a language. It's shift in the language of prestige, the acrolect, the language that will give you more success. And then eventually you resort, and this is why Jesus, when he speaks to hoi polloi, he actually he has to know Hebrew, because the hoi polloi, they spoke Hebrew. So the ones who speak Hebrew are the low classes. The upper classes don't speak Hebrew. They speak Aramaic. So this is a very interesting development. And it appears also in, say, Peru. The ones who speak Quechua are the low classes. Unfortunately, I'm saying unfortunately because I'm a linguist who loves as many languages as possible. So you have a period in which the ones who speak Hebrew are the kind of uneducated.
Now,
And yeah.
Can you explain the difference between linguicide and glossophagy, the terms that you were using? Because one of them is more aggressive, like rooting out of a language by a colonial power, right?
Exactly. So it's a little bit. So linguicide is when I put a gun to your head and I say, if you speak the language, I'll kill you, or I take your child from you and you say you're not allowed to speak the language, and or if you speak the language, I punish you. There are places in the world, unfortunately, if you speak a language, say, which is not the school official language, you're being punished. This is, I don't want to give examples, but it's all over the world. It's linguicide, it's language killing. Whereas glottophagy is more, look, parents, they say, well, our child will be better off if he studies this language, if he speaks that language. Why should he speak that language that only 2,000 people speak? This is a waste of our time and resources. Usually parents are unaware of the advantages of multilingualism, of native bilingualism. We know that native bilingualism, so if you're a native speaker of two languages, you'll get your dementia 4.5 years later. So if it's written in your genes, Stephen, that you get your dementia at the age of 100, now you are a native speaker of two languages, you will get your dementia at the age of 104.5. Now, this is important, especially when we enter an era in which we live longer and longer and longer. You don't want to get your dementia so early. You want you to push your dementia far away. So it is actually better for Aboriginal Australians to have their kids being native speakers of two languages. However, it's very hard to convince parents that they should have two languages, because they say, oh no, the kids are lazy, they don't respond when I speak to them in my heritage language. You know, you've heard it by many immigrants. I mean, how many Italians in Australia speak? How many Italians in America speak Italian? How many Italian Americans speak Italian? Very, very few. Does Roberto De Niro speak Italian? Well, he knows a little bit, but I mean, he's not like a native speaker, of course, etc., etc. Does Leonardo DiCaprio speak Italian? Why? Because so well, we are American. America is the language. It's the important language of this of the nation of America. It's the lingua franca of the world, etc. Why bother the kids with Italian? That's the Weltanschauung, the worldview that causes this unfortunate reality in which more and more English speakers are monolingual.
Got it. But if it's happening in that natural scenario, that's not linguicide. That's glossophagy.
Glottophagy. It's language eating. So it's eating glottophagy. Glottophagy. Yeah, I use the T, not this S. I know that in Greek you have glossa. And glotta,
we're talking about English. I probably messed that up. But so glottophagy is what's happening here, where basically the prestige language is Aramaic and then the prestige language is Greek, right? You get like and then Hebrew gets pushed down to the lower classes, right? Am I tracking with this timeline? The Hasmonean period is like full-blown Hellenism, right?
Yes, but don't forget that. You're right. You're absolutely right. But Aramaic is still the lingua franca, even when the Greeks are around.
Yeah.
And then when the Jews are kicked out to Mesopotamia, eventually, like this, the second or whatever, the third time. I'm talking about the 2nd century AD. Josephus Flavius talks about it. This is when Aramaic is the language, and this is when they arrive in Iraq, they don't speak Hebrew anymore.
Yeah, and Josephus is writing in Greek, but complaining about how his Greek is not native, how he struggles to pronounce it. It's, he's very clear that his native language is Aramaic, right?
You're talking about whom,
Flavius Josephus.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. So Greek is not his mother tongue, and also it's not Jesus's mother tongue.
Yeah.
Let us not forget it. Jesus spoke Aramaic as his mother tongue. He knew Hebrew, and I guess he knew Greek as well, but I don't know how well he knew, but definitely his mother tongue was Aramaic. So the difference between a mother tongue and a non-mother tongue, as I said earlier, is so important, and therefore you cannot argue that Israeli is just modern Hebrew as if it's an organic evolution and not a revolution or hybridic revolution.
Now, this graph is from Robert Rosetko and Ian Young's book, page 63, which is representing the Dictionary of Classical Hebrew, which I didn't get access to, which is why I'm using their graph, but I think it's very well put together in their book, Historical Linguistics and Biblical Hebrew, which I recommend to everybody. So this gives you an idea of basically what we're looking at now prior to the revival period of the distribution of vocabulary between the Hebrew inscriptions, the older stuff, the Wisdom of Ben Sira, non-biblical Dead Sea Scrolls, and then the Hebrew Bible itself, right? Like most of the vocabulary we have is coming from the Hebrew Bible, like 80% of it, but then we have this 20% sliver of extra biblical vocabulary coming in from other sources prior to the introduction of Mishnaic Hebrew, right? Is that okay? And so, but these are just tokens, right? These are just like collections of words. There's duplicates, there's triplicates, right? And then in this, so the period where basically, okay, like we're sort of pre 70 AD, and then the fall of the Second Temple, the Zugot, Tanaim, Amoraim. This is the transition from native Hebrew speakers to Mishnaic, speakers of these are Aramaic speakers, right? Who now are commanding Mishnaic Hebrew as a non-native language, right? As a liturgical language.
Absolutely. They don't speak Hebrew natively, and therefore they need the help of some native speakers who obviously are low classes to help them.
Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about, when we use the euphemism dormancy and we say that the language went dormant, we do that because the language wasn't snuffed out completely, right? It's not like it's not like Egypt, ancient Egyptian. I mean, Egyptian continued in Coptic, but like we have a continuity. It's just the continuity is shifted now to where this is just a museum piece. This is a language that's exclusively for liturgy, right?
Yes, I actually use the term sleeping beauty. Sleeping beauty, not because you just need to kiss it in order to wake her up, but because it's a positive term. And in the case of Australia, I call Aboriginal languages that had been subject to linguists, I call them dreaming beauty, because there is an idea of dream time, which is spirituality and dreaming beauty, as opposed to Hebrew, which was a sleeping beauty. Now, a sleeping beauty, of course, evolves, but evolves as a literary language, not in the brain, but in the peripheral brain, not in the actual brain. But so it's a completely different evolution compared with a native language. This is how I use evolution. It's not kind of evolution with a positive sense of becoming a better thing. It's just evolution, meaning it just continues.
So you mentioned that, and this is kind of a really nice anchor. Bar Kokhba is you're saying that's the terminus, right? That's where it's like it stops being a native language of a population that's speaking it from childhood. They're speaking they're speaking Aramaic from childhood, but they're continuing to maintain the literary or liturgical form of Hebrew. They're composing the Talmud. and you're entering the sort of this Byzantine period, and then you get the Masoretes, right? And you get the emergence of the final form of the Hebrew Bible that is pointed and cantillated, and so. Like, what is the status of the language when the Hebrew Bible is taking its final form in the stage that you call medieval Hebrews in the plural, right? Like, you get like, how are they able to compile and finalize the Bible and do all of this in a language that is not their native language? Because that's where I get a lot of the pushback. Is like, well, if the Hebrew Bible reached its final form, if the Masoretes are working from the 7th century to the 11th century. These guys were like very, very competent in Hebrew. So clearly it's not a dead language, like, a dormant language, like it's an active language. Can you explain this?
It is an active language, like my English is an active language. So what I'm trying to say is that they know Hebrew extremely well. I mean, you can ask yourself, how did the vocalization, how did they vocalize the Bible, which was obviously not vocalized? It is the pointings, the Nikud. How did they do it 1,500 years after it was written?
Gil'ad, sorry to interrupt. Your audio got significantly worse, and I don't know if maybe there's a plug that you need to sort of tweak. But your voice started breaking up just in the last few minutes, and it wasn't like that before. So if you could fix your audio before you continue, I hate to interrupt, but.
So wait a second. Can you hear me well?
You're breaking up, and you weren't breaking up this entire discussion. So if anything changed, any microphone. Sorry for the technical difficulty.
Check.
I assume everybody can hear that.
Stop using everything. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's just it seemed like your microphone quality got significantly worse. It was just harder to make out what you were saying.
I see what you mean. What about now? Can you hear me now?
I think you fixed it.
Okay, I understand. I think that it has to do with let's see. I'm using my mobile phone, unfortunately. So
I think you're better now. Now.
Okay, no worries. Let me know if there is a problem.
No, that's better. You fixed it.
Okay, no worries. So I will just.
So you were talking about the Masoretes and the formation of the final form of the Hebrew Bible.
So look, these people. So I gave the example of the Nakdanim, the Tiberian Nikud vocalization that happened took place 1,500 years later. These people were very clever people who knew Hebrew as a non-native language, a little bit like as a scholar, like my ancient Greek teacher, professor, David at the Tel Aviv University. He told me that he actually David Weissert, his name was, he thought in ancient Greek. He told me he was thinking in ancient Greek, but he was not a native speaker. But of course, he could definitely do things with Kratinos, with Aristophanes. Like he was a scholar. These people were scholars, and they managed to produce this edition of the Bible with great success. Of course, it's full of mistakes. Of course, you mentioned Ian Young, who is an Australian, by the way. He's based at the Australian Catholic University. He gave the statistics that you gave, Ian Young. He believes in a minimalist program. He believes that the Bible, the original Bible, was written almost in one go. And what we believe is late biblical Hebrew as opposed to early biblical. He saw it as, if you want, different dialects of Hebrew rather than different temporal reasons. So they knew Hebrew very well. this does not mean for a moment that Hebrew never died as a native language. So it did die as a native language.
Well, and we're speaking English now, and you mentioned you gave English as an example. Like, how old were you when you started learning English? You were a child, right?
So I was more than a child. I was 10, Kita Dalet. So wait a second. So Kita Dalet, 7, 8, 9, 11. I was 11. So
Yeah.
10 and a half, probably 10 and a half. And obviously I learned English once a week. So it's not that my parents spoke to me in English. We moved to America. Had I moved to America at the age of 10, I would have become a native speaker. So native speech you can acquire prior to puberty. After puberty, you're a foreign speaker. So look at Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger sounded completely un-American to me.
Yeah.
But his brother, who arrived when he was before puberty, sounded exactly like any American. So, in other words,
So is it comparable? Like, so I would consider you to be like near native English, right? Like in terms of your command of the grammar and the vocabulary. Would their level of Hebrew be comparable to that? Like, it's not their native language, but they've been drilled.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And the reason is that the reason my non-native English might sound not that bad to you is that I have been a professor at universities all over the world, speaking in English. So I spoke to native speakers like you.
Yeah, you're right.
They could not speak to any native speaker of Hebrew because there were no native speakers of Hebrew. So they have a huge disadvantage compared with me. And also, Eliezer Ben-Yehuda had a huge disadvantage because he, who was the first native speaker or the first speaker of Israeli, 1886, not 1885, because he was born 1882, which is 1 year after Ben-Yehuda arrived in Israel, 1881, and he started speaking at the age of 4. He said Abba, at the age of 4. It's very late because he was only exposed to Eliezer Ben-Yehuda and some others who were non-native speakers. So this is why he started speaking at the age of 4 in 1886. So I would like to correct. Bar Kochva, 135 AD, the end of Hebrew. Itamar ben Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, 1886. This is the first native speaker of Israeli. So between 1886 and 135, what do you have? Like 1,750 years of people who are scholars, but 1 scholar, 5 scholars, 10 scholars. But it's not the case that they go to a conference in Poland and the entire conference is being conducted in Hebrew. Absolutely not.
Now,
and therefore, Haramati, there was a guy called Shlomo Haramati, and also Chomsky's father, Ze'ev William Chomsky. Chomsky is Noam Chomsky. Probably people know him if they read Epstein's
a lot of people.
So,
a lot more people know him now.
So Chomsky, his father was Chomsky, Ze'ev William Chomsky. He said wrongly, there were never in the world somewhere, there were always in the world somewhere in the world or in Eretz Israel, individuals or even groups who could and did employ the Hebrew language effectively in oral usage. This is what he said. Now, he is right if he means as a lingua franca. He's right. Like in 1500, if a Polish Jew goes to Egypt, he would say to the Egyptian Jew, "Hasholom lecho," is peace on you. He would never say manishma, which is what's heard, vosercech in Yiddish, or shtoslichna in Polish, or tsoswichach in Russian, or Chesaude in Romanian. He would say Hasholom lecho. So it was a lingua franca. This is what Chomsky, Noam, believes. When I spoke to Noam Chomsky, I'm Epstein +2. Do you know in mathematics there is Erdos number? You know Erdos number in mathematics? No. When you publish an article with somebody who published an article with Erdos, that you become like 0, 1,
you're-
2.
So you
I'm
didn't
Erdos 4.
you didn't make it into the Epstein files, but you are associated
Absolutely
with people.
not. God forbid. But I talked to somebody who met him, so that I'm Epstein plus 1.
And that makes me Epstein plus 3, right?
exactly. So you might be Epstein plus 1 as well. I mean, if you spoke to.
I haven't met Chomsky. So the arguments that I hear, and we're going to get to some of these chats that are pushing this point, that the revival of Hebrew, basically, a lot of people diminish the accomplishment, or I would say that they're diminishing the accomplishment of Eliezer Ben-Yehuda and his son Itamar Ben-Avi in their revival of Hebrew by saying that this was just the culmination of Maskilic Hebrew, that the Haskalah Jewish Enlightenment was already underway and taking place, and that Ben-Yehuda was just sort of capitalizing on what was going on already, like that Hebrew was already revived, and he just sort of experimented on his kid. Like, can you explain what's going on from the Jewish Golden Age in Poland, where people were using Yiddish, but then early modern Hebrew sort of starts to kind of come to fruition or formation in the 18th century, leading up into the Haskalah? Like, can you give a little background on this linguistically?
Yeah, firstly, I think that the people who say what you've just said completely underestimate the importance of Eliezer Ben-Yehuda and the importance of the reclamation of Hebrew, which is a fin de siècle movement rather than a Haskalah movement. It is true that the Haskalah, the Aufklärung, the Enlightenment period of, say, 1770, 1880, that kind of period of the 19th century was important. And in fact, I argue that the grandfather of Israeli is Mendeley Moicher Sforim, Mendeley, the salesman of books, Moicher Sforim, or Mocher Sfarim in Israeli, Mocher Sfarim. So seller of books, bookseller, and in Yiddish, Moicher Sforim. So he definitely is a grandfather, if you want, but he is not the revivalist. The linguistic revival, the vernacularization, did not happen before Eliezer Ben-Yehuda. Vernacularization means that Ben-Yehuda had to go to jail because the ultra-Orthodox thought that he was desecrating the holy language of the Mishnah, the holy language, Loshen Kodesh, the holy language, so the language of holiness of the Hebrew Bible. And if the people who said what they said were right, then the ultra-Orthodox would have never called the police, the Ottoman police, and said to them that Eliezer Ben-Yehuda was desecrating the holy language. I mean, think about it. So he was doing something which was very, very big. Of course, he was not on his own. I mean, we are looking for heroes. There were many writers, there were many friends, there were many teachers. The teachers are very, very important. But he was a monomaniac. As I don't know I'm not a psychiatrist, and of course it's kind of a psychiatry of somebody who died, so you cannot really do it properly. But but he was definitely something different, something psychologically different. He was obsessed about Hebrew. He was not a linguist. He was a political scientist. He understood that national, or if you will, state nationhood, this is the European model, relies on a trinity, not il Padre, il Figlio, e lo Spirito Santo, not the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, but rather a trinity of language, land, territory, and lens. This is the heritage. So what is lang?
Lang is a unifying tongue, so it can be Aramaic, it can be Hebrew, it could have been Yiddish, it could have been German, it could have been English, it could have
Arabic.
been anything. Arabic, anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a unifying tongue. However, he understood that Hebrew, because of Jewish DNA, is the most important Jewish language. He understood that. He could have probably chosen Aramaic as well. I mean, Aramaic is very important as well. Let's face it, Gemara is in Aramaic. But Hebrew was the start.
Yeah.
So my DNA, as I said earlier, comes from Hebrew speakers. Now, he also understood that it's only one of three. So land, this is Zionism. I mean, but he could have gone to Birobijan, he could have gone to Uganda, he could have gone to the Kimberley in Australia. There were many, many possibilities for a Jewish nation.
The autonomous Jewish zone in Russia, in Siberia.
Yeah, and Birobijan still today, Yiddish is an official language. It's just north of Harbin. I've just been there, Harbin in China. So you go north. This is Birobijan, which is kind of anyway. So this is land and lands. Look, every Jew had this lens. Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Twice a year, you say next year in Jerusalem for hundreds of years. So, even if I know I am from Israel, but maybe you do your DNA test and you find that you are only 20% Jewish, or you're Khazar who converted, like this kind of stupid story, which is by and large bullshit, but a palpable poppycock. Most Ashkenazic Jews are 90% and more Jewish from Canaan, from Israel. So there was no assimilation as opposed to what people believe. If there were assimilation, then these people are not Jewish today. So they are known as non-Jews. So of course there was assimilation. But the Jews, Finkelstein, Chomsky, these are people who are more than 90% in their DNA from Israel. I mean, you can look at DNA researchers that show that Ashkenazic Jews, I'm saying Ashkenazim because I'm Ashkenazic, but also because of all the myths about the Khazars who converted to Judaism and therefore Ashkenazic.
That's a rabbit trail.
This is by and large palpable poppycock and it's on. So coming back to what we were talking about, the language. So he understood. Okay, land there was. He went to Jerusalem from Paris. He studied in the Sorbonne, political science. And before then, he studied medicine, but he very quickly understood that what he wanted to do is to channel European nationalism to Israel. So European nationalism was about nation states all over. You look at Ukraine, the Ukraine, for example. What every national movement wants to speak an ancient language. Any national movement. If you look at it, you look at Belarus, you look at the Ukraine, you look at Lithuania, they all, you have like academies that show that our language is very rich, etc. Moldova, I love Moldovan anthem and Westra Limba, our language. It's an anthem which is based on language. Beautiful.
Yeah.
This is Kishinev, where Kishinev is,
And they
Now,
speak a dialect of Romanian.
Exactly. So coming back to your point, he decided to reclaim the sleeping beauty of Isaiah because he thought it would unite the Ashkenazim, the Yiddish speakers, with the Sephardim. Many of them were Ladino speakers, Judeo-Arabic speakers, and with many other Jews from all over the world, the Yemenites, the Ethiopians, the Chinese, the Indians, whatever. Jews were all over the world. And it was a political decision. He was not a linguist. And therefore, his dream was to speak like Isaiah, not Isaiah Leibovich, Isaiah the biblical. But he couldn't help it. His Yiddish, Mameloshen, mother tongue, penetrated everywhere. He wanted very much to get rid of Yiddish, but he couldn't. And Itamar, his son, as a child, he actually understood what is native and what is non-native. He understood subconsciously. Do you know, they say that children understand better than us the tension between the parents. This is exactly what happened. So Itamar is the first native speaker of Israeli. And his Israeli reflects not only what Eliezer Ben-Yehuda tried to speak, which is perfect Hebrew, but also Eliezer Ben-Yehuda's Mameloshen, which is Yiddish. And also the other languages spoken by revivalists, like Russian a little bit, like Polish a little bit. So, in other words, Israeli inadvertently continues Yiddish. Israeli is not Retzach Yiddish, which means the murder of Yiddish in Israeli. It is Yiddish Retzach. Retzach means speaks itself within Israeli.
Now, we have a super chat related to that, which is why was Sephardic pronunciation chosen as the standard for modern Hebrew when it would have been Ashkenazic pronunciation, right? Like why? What's the tension there?
Because Eliezer Ben-Yehuda's dream was to sound like an Arab, to sound like a Semite, to sound like the ancient Hebrew, with ha, with a, with a ta, with a ta, with a sa. Like my name used to be in Hebrew Gil'ad, with a. But nowadays everybody says Gil'ad. No, Gil'ad, you can only see it in my English apostrophe to represent the historic sound, a little bit like when you write the word sign, I guess you would use the letter G.
Yeah.
Although you know that you don't pronounce it. But if you don't put the G, you would actually lose the link to signal. So by writing sign with G, you do not lose the link to signal. So Gil'ad, Ya Qalbi, in Arabic, Ya Qalbi, my heart, is different from Ya Qalbi, my dog. If you tell your woman on St. Valentine's Day, Ya Qalbi, my dog, instead of Ya Qalbi, it's a very bad thing. So in Hebrew, there is a difference between qa, this qa, pharyngeal, and ka. But in Israeli, there is no difference. Now, Ben-Yehuda hated Yiddish. His Maloshen. Why? Yiddish for him represented the feeble, weak, homosexual. It's all in quotation marks. Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to convey homosexual, feminine, persecuted, diasporic, like religious Jew of the diaspora they say anti-Semitism is only in Israel and in the diaspora. Yeah, I mean, diaspora means outside Israel.
Yeah.
So when I said diasporic Jew, I mean any Jew living outside Israel. So coming back to the question.
Yeah.
He wanted to say Gil'ad, Eliezer Ben-Yehuda. He wanted to say that. He wanted Israelis to read the Bible, Bereshith, bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'eth ha'aretz. Yeah, because there is no tza in Hebrew. However, it couldn't succeed because you know what is native and what is non-native. You cannot cheat your children. Now, where did he succeed? Only in two things. The kamatz. So we say leshono. So we say, for example, chacham, clever. We don't say chochem. In Yiddish, the kamatz is o, but in Hebrew it's like cha. So chacham, clever, not chochem. And he also succeeded in the s for taf, which does not have a dagesh, which is gemination, like leshoines. It means tongues, like speaking in tongues. Leshoines in Yiddish, we say leshonot. Lashon, meaning language, leshonot, languages. But in Yiddish, we would say loshen, leshoines. But we say lashon, leshonot in Israeli. And we say chacham, we don't say chochem. That's it. Other than that, he succeeded in nothing when it comes to phonology and phonetics of Israeli. The syllable structure of Israeli is completely Yiddish. We don't say, for example, up, las, plastic. We say plastic. Plastic. It comes, plastic.
Yeah.
There is no problem in Israeli to say pla. In Hebrew, you cannot say Platon. You have to say up la ton. It's called the prothetic a, because pla is against the syllable structure of Hebrew, which is consonant, vowel, something, and then consonant. So you ek dach ek. Aleph is a glottal stop, which we don't have in Israeli. We don't pronounce the. We just say ani ohev otach, I love you. We don't say ani ohev otach. We say ani ohev otach. So we don't say ahava, which means love. We say ahava. It's aava, ahava. So there is no glottal stop. Just a little bit maybe at the beginning. We don't say hey. We don't pronounce the hey. Mm-hmm. You see.
So from Eliezer Ben-Yehuda to Itamar Ben-Avi to this gentleman here, right? You the grandson, right? So can you tell me about this interaction? Because you mentioned, and I pulled this from a presentation you gave. I may have the slideshow. You said that the expectation was that you were going to butt heads with Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, his grandson, and you got along really well. Like, how did that work out? Because you have a controversial view on the terminology, and that we're going to discuss.
Yeah. So the journalist, a lovely journalist, she invited me to Jerusalem to meet Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, the grandson. By the way, he died recently, so I participate with his family's. I would like to send my condolences. He was based in Orlando. Apropos the Book of Mormon, he was based in Orlando, and he was a rabbi, and the journalist, brought him to Jerusalem to meet me, with the hope that we would fight, because he's a grandson of Eliezer Ben-Yehuda. His name is Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, and I am somebody who says that Israeli is not Hebrew; it's a revival language. So, but I have to say that, this kind of anecdote would explain why we got along very well, because Eliezer Ben-Yehuda's grave was desecrated by some ultra-Orthodox Jews. And this was by Dola Wittmann. Dola Wittmann was Eliezer's daughter. And she recounted that. And she was told that her father's grave was desecrated, and then she asked, "So what did they write?" And they told her that something like Eliezer Ben-Yehuda ben Zona, son of a bitch or something like that. So she smiled and said, "He won," meaning they desecrated it in Hebrew.
In Hebrew.
In Hebrew. So it's kind of in other words, we won. So, in a way, I think that Eliezer Ben-Yehuda Jr. or double junior, how do you say, like the junior of the junior? Is there something in English like he's the junior of the junior? He's like the grandson.
The third.
Yeah, the third. So Eliezer Ben-Yehuda the third, he loved my what I was saying, because in a way, for him, it was a living language, so it's okay that it's a hybrid. It's not a problem. And in fact, more and more people in Israel understand the strength of arguing that Israeli is a hybridic language that does not only have multiple layers, but also multiple sources. There is nothing wrong with that. We still speak Israeli, which is different from Yiddish. It's different from English. It's different from Arabic. It's different from German. It's a alt-nai lang. Alt-nai meaning old new, but also al-tnai, which means on condition that we understand that it is very different from the Hebrew of the past. So we need to acknowledge the continuity not only of Hebrew, but also of other Jewish languages and some non-Jewish languages, because we Jews were all over the world between the expulsion and today. So there is nothing wrong with hybridity. You see, many people have this very negative view. Oh, hybrid, bastard, No, I believe in hybrid vigor.
So can you address this question? Because there was a generous super chat. Thank you, Jace Hare. It feels like Israeli breaks the connection, Israeli, the term, quote unquote, breaks the connection to history. So what's wrong with using the term modern Hebrew or Israeli Hebrew, like Roseanne? I'm curious, like, what was Eliezer Ben-Yehuda III's or Junior, what was his opinion on your terminological distinction? Like, did he object to it?
Well, look, it's almost like he acknowledged not a defeat, but not a full success. And there is nothing with acknowledging not a full success. Now, Chaim Rosen, that the lovely person refers to, was bold. He was bold because until Chaim Rosen, everybody was speaking about Hebrew, just Hebrew. We speak Hebrew in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And he was bold because he said, no, we speak Israeli Hebrew. That was bold, but he was absolutely not bold enough. Why was he not bold enough? Well, it's a little bit like Thomas Kuhn. You make a revolution within the system that you live in. So when he lived, I knew him. That was a very big step forward, to say that we do not speak Hebrew, but we speak Israeli Hebrew. Why was he not bold enough? Because if he said at his time what I am saying, he would have been shot at or some of that. So because practically people would say, no, but it's still an organic evolution. And, it's just a dialect of Hebrew. No, it's not. It's a hybrid. Why do I not say modern Hebrew? Because I don't say modern Yiddish. Why don't I say about Israeli that it's modern Yiddish? It is modern Yiddish as well.
Yeah.
Because don't forget one thing. If you analyze Israeli grammar, we talked a little bit about grammar today. We said, for example, we talked about phonology. We said em hayeled as opposed to ha'ima shel hayeled. But I could have talked about yeshli hasefer. So there is for me the book. So in Hebrew you say yeshli hasefer. There is for me the book. Hebrew was not a habere language. Habere means to have in Latin. But in Israeli we say yeshli et hasefer. Et is the accusative marker. Yeshli et hasefer means that Israeli is a habere language, just like Yiddish. Ich hob dem Buch. I have the book. Like in German, ich habe den Buch. But in Hebrew, we cannot say that. In Hebrew, we have to say hob der Buch. So apropos cases, you spoke about cases before, in the case of Russian, etc. Now, Israeli has a different grammar. I can say yeshli, koevli, it hurts me, koevli, hurts for me. Habeten, habeten is feminine. So I should have said koevet li habeten. Koevet is feminine, koev is not. But I say koevli, habeten, because koevli comes before habeten. Just as Yiddish, we say es tut mir weh, it hurts me. And then I can say whatever, the oigen. The oigen is the eyes, the eyes. Einayim.
When you pivot and you say, but in Hebrew, we say, what you mean is biblical Hebrew. What you mean is classical Hebrew, right?
Yes.
So just to decode what you're saying, when you say Hebrew, you mean Old Hebrew.
Yes. Okay. When I say Hebrew, I mean the Hebrew of Isaiah and the Hebrew of the Mishnah. When I say Israeli, I mean what you and the person who asked the question would say, and I'm sorry, I cannot see the name, would say modern Hebrew or Israeli Hebrew or revived Hebrew. Now, the Academy of the Hebrew Language tells you, don't say eser shekel. Eser shekel means 10 shekels. You have to say asara shekalim. Asara shekalim. Now, why asara shekalim? Asara, because, it's very funny, but asara is with the feminine suffix. We have the a. In Hebrew, whenever you have a, it means feminine. For example, ashir means rich man, ashira, rich woman. Asir, prisoner, Asira, female prisoner. Eser, 10 masculine, Asara, 10 feminine. So why in Hebrew, which means biblical Hebrew, Mishnah, why in Hebrew we say Asara Yeladim, which means 10 boys, 10 feminine boys? Because of polarity of gender. Polarity of gender means you put the feminine numeral together with the masculine noun. And if we say banot, which means girls, we will say eser banot, eser 10 masculine, banot girls, feminine. This is called polarity of gender. It exists even in Somali, which is a Cushitic language, which is an Afro-Asiatic language, which is related to Semitic languages. Of course, it exists also in Arabic,
Now,
which is a younger language.
So to touch on that, I got another super chat from Kirsten Garrison, which the comment she made before that is there a clear line between a dialect and a separate language, or is that mostly a social or political, construct basically? Because I think this pertains to would Israeli be considered a dialect of Hebrew, like a modern form?
No. Israeli is absolutely a fully fledged language because, as Weinreich said, a Sprach is a dialect mit an Armee und a Flot. A language is a dialect with an army and a navy. Israel has an army, it has a navy, and it has a flag. And this army, navy, and flag, of course, they're related to the ancient Hebrew, but you cannot say that it's the same army or whatever. So absolutely, it's a language, and it's a revival language, which is a wonderful language, because revival languages all over the world manifest the same characteristics. For example, in Bangla, the same characteristics as in Israeli happen. So, for example, if in Israeli, let's say in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, the word order was verb, subject, object, like Vayomer Adonai El Moshe, said God to Moses. We don't say God said to Moses, we say said God to Moses. Or in Hebrew, I would say Achal Hayeled et tapuach, ate the child the apple, right?
Yeah.
This is in Hebrew. In Israeli, I would never say, I would say, Hayeled achal tapuach, the child ate the apple. Why? Because of standard average European, just like Yiddish, just like English, subject, verb, object. Now, in Bangla, you have SOV, so subject, object, verb. But in Neo-Bangla, in Revived Bangla, you have SVO, just as English, because you're influenced by the language of the revivalists. So what I'm trying to say, revival languages show the syntax, the word order, reflect the revivalists' mother tongues rather than the language you're trying to reclaim. The phonology reflects the revivalists' mother tongues rather than the language you're trying to revive. So in other words, revival languages are one big family. So if you ask me, what is the Israeli language? Which family is the Israeli language at? I would say it is at the Semitic family, at the Indo-European, the Germanic family, and most importantly, it's at the revival languages family, together with Neo-Bangla, together with Neo-Sanskrit, together with many others, because Neo-Sanskrit performs exactly the same things. So this is very, very important to realize that Israeli is a fully fledged language with at least 6 million native speakers, maybe at least 5 million native speakers, which is a huge success for Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, because before Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, nobody spoke Israeli, because there was no Israeli. There was no Hebrew as a native language. So you can call it whatever you want. You can call it Georgian, you can call it Hebrew. Selbstgefühl, which is Trubetskoy's idea of whatever the native speaker wants to say, the native speaker is the king. You can call it whatever you want, but I am a scientist.
Yeah.
I need to say linguistically, historically, linguistically, what kind of language it is. If I am a zoologist and I analyze a koala, I can say, look, it looks like a bear, but I know it's not a bear. When I give a koala doll to my nephew or my niece in Israel, I say, look, this is dove koala, bear of a koala. But if I write a book about the zoology of the koalas in Australia, I cannot talk about bears because they're not bears, they're marsupials.
Now,
The same with Israeli. Israeli is a revival hybridic language.
and so thank you, Colton Honeycutt, for the super chat. I pulled it up when you were talking about the SVO subject, verb, object, word order, because the question and thank you for the $5. Could you touch on the changes of the verbal system from the period of biblical Hebrew to post-biblical periods? Intro of modals, aspect tense. I don't want to get too technical, but I do appreciate the super chats, and I want to make sure I get to them all.
Look, I can talk just about this topic for like 2 hours, but I won't. So I will just say the following. The word changes between biblical Hebrew and Mishnaic Hebrew. In fact, when I mentioned VSO, verb, subject, object, in Mishnaic Hebrew, you can actually see SVO as well. Even though Ben-Yehuda, in my view, saw biblical Hebrew as his dream, not the post-biblical, but it's true. There was an evolution in quotation marks, which is non-native evolution of Hebrew as well. And when I talk about Israeli, I say it is a phoenix rising from the ashes. This is not only biblical Hebrew, this is Hebrews, medieval Hebrews, etc. But in the Bible, there were perfective and imperfective. So there was no past, present, future. In Israeli, believe it or not, and I can refer you to a lovely PhD topic about it by Nurit, my friend. Israeli is also perfective, imperfective. There is no past, present, and future, as every teacher in Israel teaches. And the reason I'm saying it is as following. In the army, he said, "Ot 5 dakot הייתם כאן." In 5 minutes, you were here.
Yeah.
So use the past, but actually it's not, it's in the future. So this is what we call perfective. So
aspect or
exactly, it's an aspect. You will have been here. And I can talk to, say, Kvish 6, which is a highway in Israel. And I'm saying, I'm entering, no, אני נכנס לזה, אני נכנסתי, you don't know whether it's the past or the future. It's only perfective, imperfective. And in fact, when people talk about Israeli or modern Hebrew, and they say past, present, future, they in fact do not represent the actual spoken language. And this is a problem. We have this, let's call it purism, or let's call it prescriptivism. People, teachers of Israeli, often teach you what you should say rather than what native speakers really say. And if I come back to the example of 10 shekalim, native speakers say 10 shekel. There is no polarity of gender in Israeli. The Academy of the Hebrew Language would tell you every week, you should not say 10 shekel, you should not say 10 ילדים, you should say 10 ילדים, 10 ילדות. But Israelis do not follow these rules because they speak a language with a different grammar, which is different from the Hebrew grammar. So you can call it modern Hebrew, no problem whatsoever. But it does not have the same thing. Now, funnily enough, in the case of aspects, it is more similar to biblical Hebrew. It has aspects rather than tenses, which is post-biblical. However, in biblical Hebrew, the perfective is the past and the imperfective is the future. It's with a yud. But in Israeli, the perfective is the past form, but the imperfective is the present form. Ani nichnas, I am entering.
Now,
so this means imperfective. So the aspect is I have not yet completed the action. So we have two aspects in Israeli, perfective, imperfective. We have two aspects in biblical Hebrew, perfective, imperfective. But whilst in biblical Hebrew and in Israeli, the past form is for the perfective, in biblical Hebrew, the imperfective is the future, and in Israeli, the present form or the participle is the imperfective.
Well, and that happens in Greek too, is that Greek is a very aspectual language and didn't have a really clean-cut past, present, future system in ancient Greek, and it's very hotly debated whether or not the aorist aspect, for example, encodes the past tense in the indicative mood. It's like, really geeky stuff we don't need to geek out on. But there's definitely a shift in the verbal system and the continuity towards more clear-cut past, present, future. For example, modern Greek, if we're going to say it's evolved, right? Some people say that it's devolved and debased and corrupt, right? Like there's different value judgments on the trajectory of the language. But as a simple matter of fact, in Greek, you can say like, I will be doing something in the future habitually versus I will do something in a complete aspect. It has specificity that ancient Greek lacked, and so people who want to say that modern Greek is a debased, corrupt form of ancient Greek have to wrestle with the fact that, well, I can actually express ideas in modern Greek that I could not have my ancestors, or the Greeks' ancestors could not have expressed. Vice versa, it works in the other direction too. There's specificity in the ancient language that the modern language lacks because of its increased efficiency grammatically, or like the simplification sometimes can cut both ways. But the fact of the matter is, we still call that, like the Greeks, I'm an honorary Greek, but I'm not Greek, but the Greeks still really insist on calling their language Greek. Like if there was a Greek equivalent of a Gil'ad Zuckermann in Greece trying to convince all the Greeks that we should go back to calling the language Romaica, right? Which, now refers to the Pontic dialect in the north coast of Turkey. Or, for a long time, after the Greeks got their independence, they couldn't figure out what to call their language. Like, it's attested. The word Romaica was attested because they felt like their language was just the Roman language. I mean vernacular Greek, like the beginning of modern Greek. And then eventually they settled on this sort of idea of Nea-Hellenica, the Neo-Hellenic language, right? Which we call modern Greek, but they call it Nea-Hellenica, or just Hellenica.
Well, the main question that needs to be answered is whether there is anybody in the world who can prove to me that the current Greek is not an organic evolution of a native speech that has evolved in, whether it's positive or negative. As I said, there is no value judgment for them. Yeah. I have never seen anybody who could convince me that it was an artificial, in quotations mark, language. That in the case of Israeli, 1000 AD, nobody speaks Hebrew, any Hebrew, natively. Nobody. Yeah. And therefore, whenever you want to compare Israeli vis-a-vis Hebrew to any language vis-a-vis its ancestor, say, of course, John Grisham does not understand Chaucer. Chaucer, impossible to understand. Even Shakespeare is hard to understand for English speakers. However, Chaucer wrote in a language that reflected the vernacular of the time, which evolved and evolved and evolved. And nowadays it is reflected in Donald Trump's English or in Starmer's English, etc. Now, this is the main question. So it's not it's not a mutual intelligibility question. It's not a question of whether or not this is the closest language, or it's a question of whether or not there was a genetic chain of native speakers, where in the mind what is lit when they speak. When you speak your native language, what is lit in your brain is completely different from what is lit in your brain when you speak a non-native language. So to all those who challenge Israeli, I urge you, go to conduct a test speak in all the languages you know, and ask the tester to map what is happening in your brain. And you will see that when you speak your native tongue or tongues, because you can be a multilingual, then something else is lit. Now, when it comes to evolution and devolution, look, the best example in English is that whenever I go to Aboriginal people, they if I come on my own, say, what do you think? If I come with my son, say, what do you think? Now, many white fellows they say, oh, look at these primitive people. They don't know how to speak English. They say use instead of you. Yeah. And I'm saying, what the heck are you saying? Use actually is more in line with the original English, because in the original English, you say thou for the singular and ye for the plural. So thou, what do thou think? What do you, meaning singular, Gilad? What do the ye think? Plural. Now, nowadays, when I studied English at the age of 11, yeah, you is for both singular and plural. But nowadays, if you go to text, what do y'alls think? That's beautiful. Is this evolution, devolution? Of course, when it comes to wealth, this is complexification, because it means that we have more forms. Yeah. So this is beautiful. Now, is it beautiful or non-beautiful? Now, the best example is My Fair Lady. My Fair Lady, you have there Professor Higgins, who teaches Eliza to pronounces the vowels against the original pronunciation, because Eliza pronounces the vowels much closer to the original English than Professor Higgins, because when she says the wine in spine sties one in the pline, she actually sounds to me much more original than Professor Higgins, who says the rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain. No, I can prove it to you because I know the Great Vowel Shift. Yeah. I know the bubonic plague, the Black Death of 1347, which due to anti-Semitism caused the transfer of many Jews from Germany to Slavonic-speaking countries. This is why Yiddish underwent Slavization or Slavonization. Is the same bubonic plague that killed half of Western Europe. It's the same bubonic plague that caused aristocrats like, say, Andrew Mountbatten, Windsor, to end up with, say, lower class people. And this is what caused this huge change of plan to become plain eventually, or to spine to become Spain eventually, etc., etc. So now we have Higgins teaching Eliza to not pronounce like the original. I mean, this is kind of crazy. Now, if you go to the translation of My Fair Lady into Israeli, this is actually mind-boggling, and it's very relevant to your questions, because it was translated as Barad Yarad Bidrom Sfarad Ha-Erev, which means hail fell in southern Spain this evening. Barad Yarad Bidrom Sfarad Ha-Erev. Now, why? Because Eliza has to learn to say Barad Yarad Bidrom with a r, which exists in Hebrew, but it does not exist in Israeli. In Israeli, the elite actually says Barad Yarad Bidrom Sfarad Ha-Erev with a resh, because it's from Yiddish. R. What is shocking is at the end of My Fair Lady in Tel Aviv, the daughter of Chaim Blanc, who was a linguist, comes to him and said, Abba, like Jesus, yeah, Abba. Like Jesus would say, Abba, you know. It's in Aramaic. Abba, or like Itamar Ben-Avi saying Abba to Eliezer Ben-Yehuda. Abba, why was Professor Higgins teaching Eliza to speak like our cleaning lady? Why? Because the cleaning lady came from Morocco. She spoke Arabic, and she pronounced Barad Yarad Bidrom Sfarad Erev. It's topsy-turvy, because in Israel, the ones who pronounce the R properly, in quotation marks, according to what Eliezer Ben-Yehuda wanted them to pronounce, were the ones who were discriminated against. They were the low classes in the 50s. They came from Sephardic, Morocco, etc. Now, this is so topsy-turvy, because in Israel, Higgins teaches Eliza to sound like the low classes. It's amazing. So this is mind-boggling in my view, because you see, prescriptivism in Israel contradicts the Oxonian way. The Oxonian way, the Oxford way, is I'm from Oxford. You should all speak like me. Like, are you sure the puff of the moustache because it is a disaster. You know, this is how they speak in Oxford, and they think that everybody should speak like that. In Israel, Eliezer Ben-Yehuda say, please, don't do as I do. Do as the Arabs do. Do as the Sephardim do. Do as the Yemenites do. So don't speak like the Ashkenazic elite. But he miserably fails because you cannot lie to your children.
Now, so there's a super chat for $5. Thank you. That has the question prior to.
By the way, what is this money? Where is it going? This money? It's going to you, I hope, not to me.
It's not going to me. It's going to the Cross Bible YouTube channel that helps support
That's
our
wonderful.
whole operation. Because, you know, I haven't plugged it, but we have a Bible study platform. Which does have the Hebrew Bible, and it has the many versions of the Greek Septuagint, and so this will be the only plug for the crossbible.com, so people can subscribe on crossbible.com. We also have channel memberships, so people can sign up. So if you get a cool badge, this is a badge on a channel member, and the channel members get priority on their questions in the live chat. And then if you make a super chat, then that also helps to support the YouTube channel so that I can do this full time and make content and bring on guests and live stream and do all of this stuff. So it helps keep the engine running, keep the lights on. And the question,
Wonderful.
The super chat question is, how easily can modern Israeli children read and understand biblical Hebrew without special training? So just as a virtue of knowing Israeli, what does that give them if their parent is reading the Bible in the original using Israeli pronunciation? Like how close is it for somebody who doesn't have training?
They cannot understand the Bible. So if you take, the best thing for you to do is to conduct research on children of Israelis living overseas who do not go to a Jewish school. There are many such people. You will see that they speak Israeli perfectly, natively. Often they would not be able to read Hebrew, but even if they manage to read Hebrew, meaning somebody taught them the alphabet, the aleph bet, not the alphabet, the aleph bet, because we have the original one. By the way, the Ein, Gil'ad, the Ein is the O. So your name, Nelson, has O, which is the same as the Ein, Gil'ad, because the Greeks did not need the pharyngeal, but on the other hand, they needed something for vowels. Because we did not have vowels in Hebrew, we don't need vowels. We have the vocalization, you know. So you and me, you and I, we have actually the same letter. But coming back to the question, you take a Miami-based Israeli child. He speaks perfect Israeli. You teach him the aleph bet. You ask him to read the Bible. They will not understand the Bible. They will understand some words, of course, but they will not be able to. Chasar lev, they will think chasar lev means cruel. It means heartless. Chasar lev means fuckwit, idiot.
But
So
what about like the Shema or just prayers that Israeli speaking children get exposed to through synagogue? Like, does that land with them? Are there repetitious passages of Hebrew that click with them because they've heard it in synagogue? Like, how does that work?
Look, any Israeli in Israel studies the Bible for approximately 11 years. So from the age of 8 until the age of 18. So until the army. So this can be several hours per week. So of course, when people say, "Look, this was written in Hebrew," Hebrew is my language, but they use the Hartom Kasuto. Well, in my time, I'm now old, but in my time we use Hartom Kasuto glosses, apropos gloss and glot underneath. So like, what does it mean? Hatzvi Israel al bamotecha halal, ech naflu giborim, al tagidu bagad. So I always look down to see, but nowadays you have a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Israeli. It's called Tanakh Ram. It's by a friend, Rafi Moses, and Ahuvia Kahana, and Ahuvia, is it Kahana? No. And they translated this Tanakh, the Pentateuch, the Torah, Pentateuch, but also Ketuvim and Nevim, into Israeli. And of course, the Ministry of Education says this is an abomination. Why should you translate it? We already know it. There is a lot of look, as I said earlier, my DNA is in Israel 3,000 years ago. Nobody can tell me I'm not kind of, currently I live in Australia, but nobody can tell me that my father went to Israel as a Holocaust survivor without having had anything to do with Israel. It's palpable poppycock. So I'm from Israel. I can show you my DNA test, something that many Aboriginal people cannot show you to prove their Aboriginality. I'm indigenous for Israel. Let's take this for granted now. Now we talk about language. So I'm not, what I'm trying to tell you is that we don't need to use kind of this language thing. So, why do you say that? Is he saying that we are not kind of connected to the, no, we are connected to the land. But the language, when you revived it, you couldn't help it but continue things from your own languages. Yiddish is a beautiful language. It's a Jewish language. There is nothing to hide about Yiddish. It's not against continuity. Adrabah. On the contrary, Yiddish continues, because don't forget one thing. When my ancestors were expelled after Bar Kokhba from Israel to Mesopotamia, to Iraq, then they moved to Europe, to Italy, then they moved to Germany, then they moved to Poland, then they moved, this is part. I have also some Italian, real Italian DNA, Jewish Italian. So what I'm trying to say is that Yiddish is Jewish continuity. Yeah. What I find many Israelis trying to do, we understand the Bible without any problem because we speak Hebrew. This is palpable poppycock, and this is a pity because at the end, Israeli children don't understand the Bible if you do not teach it as you teach a language. You see, when I learned the Bible, it was taught not as a language. It was taught as history. I argue it ought to be taught as a language. And when you teach a language, you use the best modernistic methods of how to teach a language. So I don't need to teach you. I mean, you obviously you're a polyglot, you're a hyper polyglot like me, etc. You know what I mean by the best techniques of learning language, like mnemonics, etc., etc. So what I'm saying is that we do not understand the Bible because we speak Israeli. We understand the Bible because we learn 11 years the Bible. We go to the synagogue. Even if you're an atheist, you might go to the synagogue for Yom Kippur. Yeah, Shema Yisrael. Yeah, people know that lishmoa means to hear, but when you say manishma, people actually don't know that if you said manishma to Isaiah, he would have never understood you. Manishma is the most common "how are you" thing in Israel. Isaiah would have never understood you. Manishma, firstly, he would have never understood. There is no ayin. It should be manishma with an ayin, but we say manishma, manishma. So there is no ayin. He would have not understood what you said. But even if you said manishma, he would have thought, what are we going to hear? Yeah. Are we going to hear Mozart, Beethoven, Bach? What are we going to hear? Are we going to hear Stephen Nelson? Are we going to hear Gil'ad Zuckermann? What are we going to hear? Whom are we going? But actually, Manishma is a calque of Vos Herzog and all the other languages that I told you. Even Ra'ismis in Georgian, apropos, Ra'ismis, even Lithuanian, even Finnish, they all have this. But German does not have it. Was hört sich, you cannot say in German, but you can say Vos Herzog in Yiddish. So what I'm trying to say is that there is this fallacy that the Bible is written in Hebrew, we speak Hebrew, so we can understand the Bible, no problem whatsoever. Yeah. This is a fallacy. I would like to tell you that Israelis today, they have this religiosity in them, even though many are atheists. What is a religiosity? Firstly, it's just like there is one God, there is one source, Israeli is Hebrew. There is one source. just as there is one God. Then there was mitzvot. There were mitzvot. Mitzvot are good deeds. Now you have linguistic rules. You need to follow the rules. Yossi Sadid was a leftist politician, but for him to follow the rules of the academy was a mitzvah, was like holy. You must follow the rules. You cannot say eser shekel, you have to say asara shekalim, even though the rules are based on Hebrew, not on Israeli. So this is kind of replicating the religiosity. The other thing is a miracle. We believed in miracles in the past. Now we believe in the miracle of the revival. The Hebrew was revived miraculously. By the way, this contradicts this per se. The concept of miracle contradicts what you were talking about earlier about the Haskalah, etc. No. It was a miracle for many people. No, it was not a miracle. It's hybridization. So you have also rabbis. In the past, you had rabbis. Nowadays, you have the Academy of the Hebrew Language. This is like the rabbis of today. So when you look at Israel today, you see that linguistic issues are of extreme importance. Ariel Sharon, the prime minister, he gives a speech in the parliament, and he says, don't use the word, the expression yalla bye, say shalom. But Israelis say yalla bye, yalla from Arabic, bye from English. God be with you, goodbye, bye, yeah.
And I got a separate message asking it was on the Cross Bible Discord, if you could give a citation for the PhD thesis on aspect in Israeli Hebrew that you mentioned.
Yes. I'll give it to you right now.
Okay. And then, what's funny, and you and I talked about this a little bit, is that in reading Revivalistics.
By the way, I'll just tell you. Let me just, because I don't have. I'm with you practically.
You can give it to me later.
No, it's Nurit Dekel, Dekel. The only reason is that when I didn't say Dekel because she had another Eisenstadt. Yeah, Nurit Dekel Eisenstadt, because I said, is it Dekel? Is it Eisenstadt? She's a lovely expert of aspects. Nurit Dekel, and the PhD was in Amsterdam.
PhD Amsterdam. Okay. I was just going to say that, you and I talked about this, and I think it's really interesting that when I was reading Revivalistics back in 2024, and then rereading it again in the last last week, preparing for this, and just like, you and I spoke about Jeffrey Horrocks, right? So Jeffrey Horrocks wrote this amazing book, Greek: A History of the Language and Its Speakers. And you said you met him, right, over at Cambridge?
I think so, yeah.
And then Peter Mackridge wrote this excellent book called Language and National Identity in Greece, 1776 to 1976. And It's just striking to me how similar the quote unquote the glossikozitima, the Greek language question, is. Like, basically there was a revival period in Greece, and you and I chatted about it, and you admitted that it's just not really the focus of your study. And I just feel like, man, like you and I could co-author Revivalistics Part 2 and just like draw analogies. Like if you read this book, if you read Language and National Identity in Greek.
It's funny because I know both of these people, but and I remember, when I wrote a book, and one of the anonymous reviewer told me that this reminds him of Greek, but I have no idea whether it was one of them or whatever. I mean,
it's striking. It's striking the similarity, and even like the alignment of the time periods, because Greece was occupied for 400 years by the Ottomans. Their language was driven underground. So even though you do have this continuity, you have basically like the Greek Orthodox Church acting as the de facto sort of government for the Greek people under Ottoman rule. And you have the emergence of this early modern Greek period from like the 15th century to the 19th century, but it preceded diglossia because
Yes.
effectively there was this, it was full-blown diglossia. Like people would read and write and learn, they would learn to read and write in basically the language of the New Testament. But then the language they spoke at home was Romaica, or it was this sort of the predecessor of what was modern Greek, this late Byzantine kind of Greek. And it's just the funny thing is that the linguistic revivalists of early Greece, like when Greek got its independence, this sort of cabal of scholars invented this conlang, Katharevousa, right? Adamandios Korais and Andreas Kalvos and Georgios Hatzidakis, the father of linguistics in Greece. They basically they were in this situation where they felt like the language had been corrupt. They had stigmatized modern Greek, the language that had naturally descended from the ancestor. They were like, this is really bad. We need to basically reform the language, get rid of all of our Turkish loan words. And they tried to bootstrap ancient Greek onto modern Greek. And all of these people, this like educated elite, were basically trying to retrain everyone. And there are even like I have this book here, Iphonissa. This is Papadiamandis. Like this reads like ancient Greek, but it's modern, right? And I have like this dictionary here, this Yeniko Lexiko, that's literally just a Greek to Greek dictionary that's mapping modern Greek on, what they call demotiki, demotic, like sort of folksy Greek, onto the learned version of the language that is Katharevousa. And it's similar. I mean, this sort of thing exists in all languages. And what you had in Greece was basically the first authors who began to write in these mixed styles, whereas like they started using the vernacular in poetry, and it was really avant-garde, and then eventually modern Greek literature emerged from that diglossia.
Yes, but there is a big difference, Stephen. I am discussing the vernacular.
Okay.
For me, any written text is secondary to the vernacular. And the reason is very simple. Homo sapiens sapiens is born to speak. He is not born to write. Pake, what's the guy's name? He argues that the text is more important than Derrida. The text is more important than the spoken. The Pake meaning with all due respect to Derrida, the language which I am interested in is the native vernacular. Now, in the case of Hebrew, because we do not have recordings of the native vernacular from 3,300 years ago, we ought to resort to the written text. And we have an assumption that we discussed earlier, that the written text reflects the vernacular, and I don't see why not. But when it comes to Greek, the question should be, are we talking about standardization that appears also in the Turkish language revolution of 1928, 1936 by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who kind of revolutionizes Turkey, and suddenly you're not supposed to say mektep, which comes from Arabic school, kataba is to write, but rather okul. Okul is like oku, which means to read, and okula, la is a locative suffix, but okul is like école. École, it's a phonosemantic matching of école in French school, because for him, he hates Arabisms, he hates Persianisms, and he wants to be a European. He wants to have Germanisms, he wants to have Frenchisms. He's a purist in the sense of anti-Arab, anti-Persian, but he's not a purist in the sense of anti-foreignisms. It's okay to have, so this is standardization, and it changed the Turkish language. However, the native speakers of Turkish today speak a language that is an organic evolution of the Turkish, the Ottoman Turkish, and the Turkish of 500 years ago. My question to you about Greek, are you saying that when all these standardizations happened, was there for a moment a period in the history of Greek in which the language that people started speaking was not based on a vernacular that was a native speech at the time, meaning there was no period of 1,750 years of clinical death or sleeping beauty stage in which nobody speaks any form of Hebrew. This is my question to you.
Yeah, I mean, the analogous scenario in Greek was that they lived with diglossia for hundreds of years, where it was like when you went to school, and I have really great books on this topic that are written by Greeks who went to school in the 60s and the 70s before the reforms. So they had major reforms in the 1980s that led to the standardization of what we now call Standard Modern Greek, SMG. And before that, there's Lipuridis is one of the writers who wrote a series of books on this, describing how as a child, he went to school and learned the grammar and vocabulary of a language that is codified in books like this, Papadiamandis Phonisa, that was not his native language. And it was hell for him. Like he said, like it was just, we went to school and we're just grinding ancient Greek, basically. They were shoving ancient Greek down our throats, and it's not our native language. And it never was. For hundreds of years, it hadn't been. But they just existed in this state where it's like the formal, whatever was printed in the newspapers, whatever was written in books, was this like extremely dense, difficult. It would be like, it would be like as if we went to school and you send your kids to school and they're learning thou art and I spake in like ridiculous, defunct, archaic grammar and vocabulary, and they would get slapped on the wrist for saying who you talking to, because that's the way we talk. But they would be, no, it's to whom are you speaking? And that exists today. You'll have like grammar Nazi teachers in middle school that will tell you, no, you can't split infinitives. And, so this is what you discuss a lot in Revivalistics, is the influence of the Language Academy. That
right.
I'd love for you to talk on that. So, yeah.
Two further questions. Did he have to change his accent?
No, that was another thing about the battle between the Demodicists and the Catharevusiani, who they fought for, basically a century. The Demodicists won the debate, and the Demodicists supported the idea that ancient Greek was pronounced differently from modern Greek, and the Catharevusiani denied that.
Another question. So, and these days there is no diglossia. You're saying these people, their children, they speak only with a spake.
There's no diglossia. There's no diglossia in the younger generations, but there's still diglossia in the older generations of the people who were educated in Catharevusa, who opposed the linguistic reforms. And still,
the younger generation, they speak the spake Greek or they spoke Greek. That's my question.
They speak the spoke Greek, but the influence of the language question still reverberates in modern Greek today. Where if I look something up in a Russian dictionary, I wish I had a Russian dictionary by me, like in Russian and Spanish and any other language that I speak. When you look something up and you see a table of paradigms, it's very cut and dry. I mean, with Spanish, you have things like vosotros and vos and vosotros cocináis or cocináis, right? They say that in Spain. In Latin America, they don't have that form. Like, there is some inconsistency in languages that have a sprawl of dialects around the world. But Greek, oh man, Greek is schizophrenic, is what I tell people. Like, I
understand. This is fascinating. This actually deserves a proper revivalistic book, absolutely. Yeah. But what happened in the fin de siècle in Jerusalem is completely different. Why? Because in the case of Jerusalem, with Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, etc., we are not talking about people who had been speaking Hebrew already.
Yeah.
And then Eliezer Ben-Yehuda told them, please add this word or do the. They actually spoke a completely different language. Yiddish. It's not that they say, okay, take the Yiddish and then let's make it better Yiddish with Hebrew. No. They say, you stop speaking that horrible language. We are going to teach you a completely different language.
Yeah.
And the result of the Hebrew revival is that language we're talking about, which is spoken not by your friend who had to say, thus spake Zarathustra, instead of this is how Zarathustra spoke or something like that, but rather by a child, a miserable child, born to a crazy monomaniac, obsessive person, namely Eliezer Ben-Yehuda. And this child was trying to speak something, but it took him 4 years to say something because he was exposed to input that was actually non-native. So it was not like, okay, let's start with your language, but make it kind of civilized and make it standardized and make it more poetic and no, it was kind of, let's get rid of this horrific diasporic language, namely Yiddish, and let's speak Hebrew. However, in the attempt to speak perfect Hebrew, which was a foreign language, the learners, not acquirers, the learners of this language, and then acquirers as kind of like Itamar, because he was a child. So you acquire a language, you don't learn a language, because but it's a little bit like Esperanto, native Esperanto speakers or native ancient Greek speakers, as you said earlier. I mean, we need to look at them as well. This is more similar, actually, to the case of the Israeli speakers. In that process of trying to speak perfect Hebrew, this process could not happen successfully 100%, because the teachers were non-native speakers. So in other words, if you are an Esperanto teacher or you speak, but you're not a native speaker, the children will not speak Esperanto like Zamenhof's. They will have their own language, which is different from Zamenhof's. So the question is, what kind of language is that? My analysis of Israeli as is spoken vernacularly as a mother tongue, not as a literary language, because we have Shai Agnon, who writes in Mishnaic Hebrew. We have Amos Oz, who writes in kind of Israeli, but high-level Israeli. We have Edgar Keret, my friend, who writes in literary Israeli. So on the spectrum in Israel, in Israeli literature, you have a spectrum from literary Israeli to biblical Hebrew. So you
the
you
same
can write
spectrum in Greek.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this is not a vernacular that is a mother tongue. This is not a mother tongue. So I can write in Latin, I can write in ancient Greek. Ho aristos didaskalos he peira. Yeah, the best teacher is experience. Experience is the best teacher. Ho aristos didaskalos he peira. I'm sure that in modern Greek it'd be like pira or pira, etc. And but this is not a language that is native. This is something that I can do. I can.
It's a gimmick. It's a gimmick.
It's a gimmick.
Yeah.
It's a gimmick.
So
And,
is that spectrum represented here? Because I love this diagram. It's from the book.
Yes.
So the key words here: above Yiddish, you have subconscious, and above Hebrew, you have conscious, and they're all pointing towards this. Like they're all converging in Israeli. And could you kind of break down what this image represents? You got all the languages at the bottom.
Yes. So firstly, I recently watched Madama Butterfly, and in Madama Butterfly, this was in Sydney just a week or 2 weeks ago. And in Madama Butterfly, the opera, there is a famous line. So the American soldier makes Madama Butterfly pregnant, and he goes back to America, and it's a tragedy. Yeah? And she asked the consul, the American consul, tell me, Sharpless, in America, the birds, don't they nest once a year like in Japan? Because this guy told me, Pickering, that he would come back when the birds nest. I thought that they nest once a year. And of course, he knew the answer, the consul, but he's a consul, so he needs to say things in a nice way. He said, non ho studiato ornitologia. I have not studied ornithology. And I have not studied ornithology, And this allowed me to say what I said earlier to you about the phoenix and the cuckoo with some magpie characteristics, etc. But if we come back to this hybridization chart, in the hybridization chart, you have Hebrew on the one hand, which is a conscious choice by Eliezer Ben-Yehuda and all the revivalists. They want to speak Hebrew.
Yeah.
Then you have their Mameloshen, their native tongue, which is Yiddish, which penetrates, and this is completely subconscious. It's against their will. It's inadvertent. This is kind of semi-engineering. It's half engineering. And the result is hybrid vigor. I use conscious and subconscious also because of Jungian psychology. In Jung, Jung, he talks about hybrid vigor and about the conscious and the subconscious, etc. Israeli is a new language. It did not exist prior to 1886. Of course, it is based on Hebrew, which is an ancient language, 3,300 years ago, a continuation of Canaanite, as we said earlier. But of course, at the same time, it is based on Yiddish, which is the revivalists' mother tongue. They hated it, but they could not avoid its shekels. Shekels, it's kind of, they wanted to get rid of it. Yeah, shackles, not shekels as in dollars. So es a shekel is kind of funny. Now, they say es a shekel because in Yiddish you said 10 shekel. There is no distinction between masculine and feminine in Yiddish. You say, like 4 shekel, vier Menschen, four. There is no difference between 4 and 4, 10 and 10. There is nothing like that. Now, I am also talking about other contributors: Russian, Polish, German, English, Arabic, Judeo-Spanish, which is known as Ladino as well. But you cannot compare the impact of Ladino to the impact of Yiddish. It's like comparing, I don't know, Susita to a Lamborghini. Susita is a kind of a car in Israel. It's a bad car. So, I mean, Ladino, it gave us Chanukiah. We say Chanukiah, which is a menorah for Hanukkah, because of Chanukiah. We say, for example, we say Stefanito. I can say Stefanito or Joselito or Iko, Stefanico or Giladico, Iko. Yeah, it comes from Ladino.
So the diminutives that are formed in Israeli are mimicking those of like Russian and Judeo-Spanish.
Some of them, yeah. But and we say Tarapapu. Tarapapu means many years ago. Tarapapu is like the great grandfather in Ladino. Tarapapu, like 3 parents or 3 fathers. But this is negligible compared with the huge influence of Yiddish. Now, why did Yiddish influence so hugely along with Hebrew on Israeli? Because of the founder principle. The founder principle says, and this is a very important principle in the book Revivalistics, the language that emerges is based mostly on the languages of the founder population. So the founder population, the ones who were there at the beginning, they determine the nature of everything. In America, you have a lot of Puritanism. Why? Because of 100 Puritans at the beginning of America, of modern America. There were some Puritans. I remember when I was in America, and there was Michael Jackson's sister, and it was a Tuesday, the big Tuesday or whatever, and apparently you could see her tit. I mean, I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, the Super Bowl halftime show is always controversial.
Yeah. Like I was professor. I was professor in Miami at the time. Whoa! I mean, like for weeks, people did. Well, I mean, for me, it was kind of incredible. I mean, I was sucking the teeth of my mother when I was a baby. I mean, like, whoa, what's the big deal? I mean, but what I'm trying to say, I mean, this is kind of simplistic. I'm trying to say that America has a Puritan element, which is based on the Puritans' at the very beginning of America. When I talk about modern America, I don't talk about the American Indians, etc. Now, coming back to Israel, the revivalists were Yiddish speakers. Ben-Yehuda, Bialik, Agnon, all of them were Yiddish speakers, native Yiddish speakers. Yeah, they knew some Russian, they knew some of them knew some Polish.
But they
were
came in later,
Yiddish.
right? That's the thing is
The
those were
Poles,
yeah.
the Polish people, the Polish migration came later, and was influential. So when it comes to the Yiddish, the Polish Yiddish speakers were at the beginning. The Polish speakers came later in the 30s, 40s, because don't forget, the Ashkenazim from Poland, they spoke Yiddish, they didn't speak Polish. So this is important. So they knew Polish, but their Mamelosh and their native speech, their native language was Polish Yiddish, Galicianer Yiddish. This is why we say Chuchem and not Chochem. This is why we say Nujen and not Nijen and not Nujen, Nijes and not Nujes, etc. So there are differences in dialects between Polish Yiddish and Lithuanian Yiddish. We are more Polish Yiddish or Ukrainian Yiddish, not Lithuanian Yiddish.
I have a couple questions that I'll kick myself if I don't ask you before we wrap up, because I don't want to keep you too much longer. I'm sure you're like exhausted with the marathon.
Oh, I'm not exhausted, but I didn't expect our interview to be so long. So I have the next meeting with a Holocaust survivor who is 95.
Do you have to go?
And no, so I have to go. No, it's okay. I have to go in like 20 minutes or so.
Okay, well, 20 is good. So there is a movement. There are different movements online of people who are reviving spoken ancient Greek. So that's one thing. And then there's also a movement of people like there's, because of the explosion of YouTube and the democratization of knowledge, which we're also kind of participating in. There's also this new thing of like using biblical Hebrew as a spoken language as a tool to acquire, but basically to learn biblical Hebrew, with, I guess, jettisoning Israeli altogether, like using biblical Hebrew pronunciation, like a reconstructed pronunciation as like a learning tool. And this is done for ancient Greek, I think, very effectively. Like I'll just share some of the like cast here, because these are people I very much admire, like Luke Ranieri of Polymathy, Jenny Teichmann of Trio dos Trivium, and Roger Byzantius, Gerardo Guzman. Like these are people who really outclass me in terms of like they speak ancient Greek. I mean, given with different accents, different pronunciation systems. Evgenia Karayanidou is one of the only ones who's actually native Greek in Greece, and she runs a school for kids where they're teaching them ancient Greek. And so this is this new movement that is very interesting of using the communicative language method, communicative approach. Andrew Morehouse, Benjamin Cantor, Michael Kolb, right? Like, and I'm omitting people from this list. Like, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, I know many of them. I know many of them. It's interesting. Yeah.
Adrian Hundhausen has they're putting together dictionaries like this, Opharos, which is just sort of like a dictionary of colloquial ancient Greek for people who want to sort of acquire new words. Jordash Kifiak. So these are people who are like astounding in just what they're doing to sort of like it's a language revival for the purpose of like acquiring ancient Greek in a more holistic manner, where you're covering all four quadrants, like listening, speaking, reading, and writing, which in my mind is like the way you have to acquire language. And I'm personally beginning to study Hebrew now. I've been doing it for off and on for like a year, but like really having trouble because of the, like, I want to acquire a language as a communicative means, as a means of communication. And I feel like when I'm learning biblical Hebrew and I'm learning about all of these like letters that aren't really pronounced, and like I don't know, like I need guidance. Like I can't figure this out, like what my roadmap is to acquiring Hebrew. Should I go with like the communicative approach of using biblical Hebrew, maybe the way that Ben-Yehuda would have envisioned it, or do I just learn Israeli and then pivot to Hebrew? Like, what are your recommendations for like learning? If you want to learn biblical Hebrew, but you want to be able to communicate, like, what do you do? Like, where,
When I was professor in America, I taught Hebrew, among other things. And half of my students were Jews who wanted to go to Israel and maybe to find a husband or a wife, or like there were Jews from American Jews, and half were kind of African Americans who were very Christian, and they wanted to connect with the Hebrew Bible. And I found it ludicrous, because what it meant was that I had to teach two languages in the same. I mean, it's kind of. I mean, can you imagine? Like, you go to Oxford and they teach you ancient Greek and ancient Latin at the same, like, together.
Well, so I do a Greek class every Saturday, and I actually do teach my students ancient Greek and modern Greek at the same time. I always make sure that they know where they are in that spectrum, and we will do like a lesson where we focus on modern Greek, but then we'll do a lesson where we like focus exclusively on the Bible. So I understand that may sound ludicrous to a lot of people, but I think if it's done with the right method and approach, it can be done.
I agree with you. I think that if you do it in a very linguistically advanced, it's almost like teaching linguistics rather than teaching, normal teaching of language. But what I'm saying is that in America, it is often the case, not always, that the teacher of African Americans who are very Christian, and the Jews who want to go to Israel maybe to find a friend or whatever, is not a linguist, but rather, say, somebody who is a native speaker of Israeli, and they believe that they know the Bible ipso facto because it's written in Hebrew, we speak Hebrew. So there is kind of, it's almost like when you teach it, Stephen, you are aware of all the complexities and all the, but when most people teach Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, or Hebrew and Israeli, they are actually oblivious to what you were very meticulously trying to show, that in fact Greek underwent this horrific or kind of impressive standardizations. So you are actually very aware of this kind of, but I'm talking about lack of awareness here. So yeah, if you're aware, then it's okay. I mean, I personally believe that Israeli should be taught as one course and Hebrew should be taught as another course. Then, if you want, you can study linguistics of Hebrew vis-a-vis Israeli, and then make all the connections or lack of connections. The reason is very simple. If you study the biblical Hebrew with, say, an Israeli, or with somebody who will teach you modern Hebrew, and then, you will never master Hebrew. You will always be kind of parasitic on Israeli, which is, as I said earlier, it's not only Hebrew. So in other words, it's a little bit like, I mean, what do I prefer? Like,
so what would be your recommendation for me if my target is the Bible and not necessarily Israeli newspapers, but I want to be able to communicate to reinforce my language acquisition? What do I do?
Study philology, study biblical philology. So biblical philology. So in other words, study philology of the Bible. Don't study with rabbis. Don't study, I mean, as a generalization, I'm not saying maybe there is a rabbi who is a philologist, but don't study with rabbis. Don't study with, people who use the Bible as a tool for religion. Study with philologies. So, for example, my friend, unfortunately, my late friend, Chaim Cohen from Ben-Gurion University. There are several Chaim Cohens. He was a philologist, so he would tell you that, for example, when Samson touches there is Samson, and he touches the poles,
pillars,
and it's written the pillars, the pillars, and it's written Vailpot, Lafat. Now, so people say Lafat, it's kind of it's held very strongly. This is what the meaning in Israeli, but he proved philologically that actually Lafat was the opposite. It was like touching, non-touching. So he was kind of bullshitting the Philistine. It was the Philistines, the Samson against the Philistines. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say, he was a philologist who, for example, proved to you that Pesach does not mean pass over, but actually it means defend. Lifsoach in the Bible does not mean to pass over, as every Jew almost believes. Every Israeli believes lifsoach means to pass over. So God passed over the Jewish homes, and he didn't want to touch to give them the plagues. No, it means to defend. Lifsoach means to defend. So you need not to learn with people like there is a guy, not Ravitsky, but another one who teaches the Bible at the Hebrew University, because they're not philologists. You need to find a philologist.
I teach myself languages, so I don't really learn it from people. I learn from study material, textbooks, audio, visual aids, videos. Like I probably wouldn't have the patience to be in an actual classroom setting. But look, I'll show you just before we wrap up, like just an example of what I'm talking about with this, like with the issues with Greek, right? If you look up the term Lego, right? And this is a really basic word, right? It gives you the first entry in Wiktionary is going to be ancient Greek, right? And it's just like to put in order, to choose, gather, right? That's the basic meaning. The secondary meaning is to say, right? And if you look up the paradigms in ancient Greek, they're super squeaky clean, right? It's just like Lego, legis, legi. You got the subjunctive, the optative, imperative. You got the dual forms, right? Like ancient Greek is super, super standardized because it's a museum piece, right? It's like been fossilized. But then you get into the descendants where it's like, okay, Greek still has Lego, but it also has this arguably, I don't know, I wouldn't say bastardized, but it has a condensed version, Leo. And if you come down a little further, it's like, oh, now we get what they call Greek, which is modern Greek. And this is the formal alternative of what is now in Greek Leo. And so this is the stuff that like this makes like modern Greek. If you want to learn modern Greek, it's a minefield because you're constantly butting up against these quote unquote alternative forms, which are just ancient Greek. And then when you try to look up, okay, well, how do I conjugate this damn thing? It's like there are forms that are in brackets, there are forms that are in curly braces. Like this language is like really in conflict with itself. What this entry's trying to tell you is like, well, if you're just learning how to communicate, you just learn these ones here on the left. But then if you like want to know if you want to be able to read some of the literature, you have to be familiar with these formal varieties on the right. And I don't know if this is analogous to Hebrew, like with like where Israeli, if you look something up in Israeli and it's like all over the map?
But firstly, absolutely, it could be like that. I have never seen such an amplified kind of modernistic thing in the case of Hebrew, but it can definitely be like that. By the way, I studied ancient Greek with David Weisser, and this was in the 90s, and he used to give us to print out something that he made. So there was no internet as such. I mean, it was before the internet as today. So I wish you were alive to show him what we have ended up with. This is mind-boggling what you've just shown. I'm very happy to see that. But I have to say that I remember so well from the 90s because it was a very memorable course or several courses at Tel Aviv University. But look, you could do that as well. This is a philological, linguistic endeavor into the differences between Hebrew and Israeli. Mm-hmm. This, for a philologist, would be great. Absolutely, it's irrelevant to the African-American student at the University of Miami or the Jewish student at Harvard or who is not interested in that, but just wanted either to read the Old Testament in a kind of more critical way and to know what does it mean when they say that, or the New Testament, what is the difference between Alma and Parthenos, for example, or virgin, etc. So this is completely irrelevant to somebody who is not interested in linguistics, philology, and just wants to speak to somebody who, when he arrives at Ben Gurion Airport in Israel. And, so what I'm trying to say, maybe for you, Stephen, yeah, do exactly what you showed me, which is very similar to a philological study. In a philological study, you will have more about the etymology, more about all the occurrences that this word appeared in. I guess you could open more windows.
So basically, if the language is a spectrum, and I showed you the spectrum in Greek in one word, right? That's just one example. There's like bazillion. So like if it's a spectrum and you learn one concept, which is a simple thing to speak, but then you got all these different positions on the spectrum, you're saying that if you're learning Hebrew as a philologist, somebody who's linguistically inclined, that it's okay to kind of embrace that whole spectrum and not like target Israeli, focus on Israeli, and then pivot to Hebrew or vice versa. I could absorb the whole thing.
Absolutely. But if you want to study Israeli, then you also need to study not only Hebrew, you need to study Yiddish. You need to study a little bit of Polish, a little bit of Russian.
That's a can of worms.
You need to study a little bit of Arabic.
Russian, I got under my belt already.
But absolutely Yiddish you need to study. So in other words, one of the criticisms that I have voiced in Israel is when you want to study Israeli linguistics, they force you to study Aramaic or Arabic, but they don't force you to study Yiddish. I find it ludicrous because, of course, in the case of Israeli, Yiddish is much more important than Aramaic. Aramaic is a very important language for Hebrew, but it's not that important for Israeli. Arabic is completely unimportant for Hebrew because Hebrew, of course, is before Arabic. But it is a little bit important for Israeli because, as I told you, when you want to curse in Israel, you use Arabisms. And not only for cursing, also for other things. There are Arabisms. Nothing like Yiddishisms, but there are like slangisms in Arabic, etc. So what I'm trying to say, and sometimes, by the way, along with the founder principle, maybe it's the last principle that I should mention, you have the congruence principle. So the congruence principle says that the more languages a linguistic feature exists in, the more likely it is to persist in the emerging language. So for example, we say Haifa, we don't say Haifa. Why do we say Haifa? Is it because of Arabic? In Arabic you say Haifa, or is it because of Yiddish, where always it's like penultimate stress rather than, not always, but it's penultimately stress rather than finally stress. So for example, we say Yosef. Is it because of Yosef or is it because of Yusuf? Yosef is Yiddish, Yusuf is Arabic. So sometimes it's because of both of them at the same time. In other words, you have a confluence or convergence, the principle, the congruence principle works because you say, like you ask yourself, okay, are we going to say ha in Israeli? Well, let's look at Yiddish. There is no ha in Yiddish. Let's look at Russian. There is no ha. Let's look at Polish. There is no ha. Let's look at Ladino. There is no ha. Let's look at Arabic. There is ha. Let's look at the Hebrew. There is ha. And then you say, okay, statistically, it's more likely not to enter because there are more languages that influence or contribute to the new language that do not have ha, and therefore we do not have ha, we have ch. So for example, instead of ya habibi, we say ya habibi, chabub. In Arabic you say ana bahibbak, I love you. Well, ha is love, like hub. But in Israeli, chaviv is with a ch, not with a ha. So we have ch like in Dutch. We don't have ha like in Arabic. So in Arabic, you have both ha and cha. So practically what I'm saying is that there are two principles at the center. One is the founder principle. The founder population is the most important, significant population. And the other one is a congruence principle. The more languages have a specific linguistic feature, the more likely it is to persist in the emerging tongue. So it's a statistical model rather than a black and white model. It's not it's not that, you see, in the you showed us a tree of languages, and every language has one parent. So, for example, Hebrew is Canaanite. Canaanite is Northwestern Semitic. Northwestern Semitic is Semitic. Semitic is Afro-Asiatic. There is always one parent. But what I'm saying is that Israeli has multiple parents. And therefore, when you study Israeli, of course, you can study it along with Hebrew because it is one of the parent of Israeli, but it's not the only parent. So if you only do Hebrew and Israeli together, then you forget about all the other part of Israeli.
So basically, for my approach to modern Greek, what I tell my students is you can't learn modern Greek without like at least getting some of the ancestor language in there, because modern Greek lives in the shadow of its ancestor. It can't escape it. So you're
Absolutely.
saying that to properly acquire Israeli fully as a philologist, you need to basically you need to fan out into that whole spectrum of the ancestral languages.
And on the other hand, in order to acquire ancient Hebrew, you don't need Israeli.
Yeah, exactly.
Because-
by the way, the same thing. In order to acquire ancient Greek, you don't need modern Greek at all.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
a few last minute questions that are coming in. I got to all the super chats. Thank you, Neil, for saying English has Germanic and Latin roots too. So by that logic, like you would also technically, if you really want to fully understand English, like you got to know about Norman French. You got to know a lot about Latin for your.
Well, I said 58% of lexis in English is Latin French. 58%. Only 25% of English is Germanic when it comes to lexis. However, when it comes to grammar, it's different. It's actually very similar to German. I mean, like you say, spricht, sprechen, sprach, gesprochen, spruch. You have to speak in various like we have the upload, but you have sing, sang, sung, song. Sing, sang, sung, song. Like I sing a song and I sang as I have sung. So you say spake, spoke, spoken, like sprechen. So yeah, look, Stephen, I can't believe that we have spoken for almost 4 hours.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
I didn't even have a sip of water, and I'm doing intermittent fasting. So like I didn't, I haven't
great.
eaten for I don't know how many.
Thank you so much for your time.
No, it's a pleasure. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I can't believe that it's almost 4 hours. I mean,
by the way, so my last question, just so I could show the platform, right? On Cross Bible, I have the Westminster Leningrad Codex, and what you can do is you can align it with like the Septuagint, right? And you can flip the orientation so that they sort of go on top of each other. And I was looking on, from some of the data sources that I use to sort of get Bibles onto the platform. I'm constantly acquiring new versions of the Bible. And I noticed that it's very hard to get like an Israeli Hebrew Bible so that you could drop it in here and align and compare and contrast the original, Masoretic text with a modern Israeli paraphrase. What's up with that? Like, why is it so hard for is it just because they don't want to paraphrase the Bible into Israeli? Like, is that a stigmatized, like, is it a sensitive topic?
Well, I have multiplied the number of admirers / enemies by a factor of 1,000,000 when I published a defense of Tanakh Ram. The editor is Rafi Moses. I mentioned him 3 hours ago. And Tanakh Ram is an attempt to translate the Bible into Israeli. I should say high-level Israeli, or kind of a little bit highfalutin Israeli. The Shimshon Shoshani, who was the head of the Ministry of Education in Israel, said, I guess jocularly, that he was going to hang the principals who approve the Tanakh Ram to be brought to the school. So he was against it because it is against the idea that an Israeli can read the Bible without any problem, which is a fallacy that has been even told by clever people like Avi Ravitsky. Avi Ravitsky said that any Israeli can read the Bible without any problem. It's a fallacy. It's a myth. It's absolutely untrue. And I'm happy to report that there are more and more following a book that I published in 2008 in Israel called Israelit Safaya Fa, Israeli, a beautiful language. So this predates Tanakh Ram as we know it today. So following this book, there are more and more translations, and you will be able to come to Israel and to buy such translations,
Well,
whether or not they're already inside this kind of beautiful website. I understand they might not be there.
Well, I will have to write you and strategize on. I feel like the Israelis deserve to have an Israeli Bible in here to put stack up. Like, you know, I just need to
I
figure out
agree
which
with you.
version I need to get. What can I?
I
What
agree
what
with
can
you.
Yeah.
But I will tell you a last thing. I agree with you because there was a big debate in Oranim, which is a lovely college in Israel near the University of Haifa. And I was invited as a keynoter, and then they invited many people like Uzi Onan, who died, unfortunately. He was a famous linguist. And Uzi Onan spoke, and everybody was very happy because he spoke against me. Now, let me explain. He said, I completely disagree with Professor Zuckermann. I completely disagree that we need to translate because I argued that we need to translate the Hebrew Bible into Israeli. I completely disagree. So everybody thought that what he was trying to say is that Israelis do not need to have a translation. And then suddenly, because he was very clever, he said what he really thought. I don't want Israelis to understand the Bible. So he actually said that he was against me, not because any Israeli could read the Bible, but because Israelis cannot understand the Bible, and it's better if they don't understand the Bible. What he meant was very interesting. I mean, by the way, he thinks again something that I disagree with. He thought that the Bible had too many cruel parts, like Leviticus or whatever. I mean, if you look at I mean, very simplistically, what is Islam? I mean, you take like Leviticus and you on steroids. You know, you kind of you kind of get some cruel parts of the Bible, and and they're on steroids. So this is the Quran. What is the New Testament? It's like you take the beautiful parts of the Hebrew Bible on steroids, and so they're very nice. You know, somebody gives you how do you say? Turn the other cheek. So like it's like you know, Christian morality is very positive. I mean, you don't. Anyway, this is kind of simplistic. I hope nobody's going to sue me, to attack me for that. But Uzi Onan saw the Bible, the Old Testament, as having too many Quranic verses, so to speak. I mean, like too many cruel verses, etc. He wanted Israelis not to understand the Bible. And this is why Uzi Onan, a very famous Israeli linguist before my time, so he died at the age of, I think, 100 or something like that. And so he was like of the time of Rosen, etc. He actually, at the end of the day, acknowledged that I mean, he didn't publish anything, but he actually agreed that Israelis cannot read the Bible, but he didn't want them to understand the Bible. I say, no, I want Israelis to understand the Bible because this is part of your heritage, and the Bible has beautiful parts. You know, nothing is perfect. And so I think that the Bible ought to be taught in Israel. But as you say, perspicaciously, Stephen, with translations. And we have more and more translations.
Well, I'm going to consult you on which ones I should license and where I can, you know, maybe you can make some introductions so I can license a proper Israeli Bible so it can be put side by side with the original and compared by Israeli speakers.
I will put you in touch with my friend Rafi Moses. Rafi Moses is he's a grammar Nazi. So like he's, you know, he wants Israelis to speak proper Hebrew, etc. Despite this fact, we are close friends. So, and he did a very good thing, which is to translate the Bible into Israeli.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I hope a lot of people found it very edifying. I sure did.
Do you know why I do that, Stephen? Why do I do that?
Shalom.
No, I'm a Kohen. I'm a priest.
Oh, okay.
Only 4% of Jews are priests. So I'm a Kohen genetically. And 4% are Levites. But these ones is the bracha the bracha, the blessing of the Kohen. This is why Leonard Nimoy took it, because he remembered it from the synagogue. He's Jewish, of course, Leonard Nimoy. So this is the Kohen bracha. So if I do like that, it means as a Kohen, a Kohen means I'm descended from Aharon, the brother of Moses. And I bless you, Stephen. It was such a pleasure to talk to you, seriously. And I can't believe that we spoke for almost 4 hours, and I did not even. No,
Yeah,
seriously. I mean,
go down to the description and get yourself. There's a link to this book, to Amazon affiliate link. It helps the channel. We get a few cents off of it, and it will. This is really a must-have for any language nerd. And if you're listening for this long, you're probably a language nerd. So drop down in the description and order one of these. Revivalistics. You may get some requests after this from some of my friends who might want to interview you to discuss more geeky stuff.
with pleasure. Thank you, Stephen. Take care. It's a pleasure.
Yeah,
Take
you very
care.
much. Okay,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye.